The workday started at 0400 hours. Brian had just gone to bed after a nightclub party with his friends. These two were as different as heaven and earth, day and night, fire and water. It was hard to imagine people more different from each other than the handsome Major Brian Alex and the simple milkmaid Vivian Pavlova. If someone had told them that one day they would become husband and wife, both would have laughed in the interlocutor's face. It was the most ridiculous thing imaginable, and yet one day it did happen. Vivian was born into a simple family. Her mother was a clerk in the only grocery store in the village. Her father was a tractor driver. Besides Vivian, there were 3 other children in the family. They lived poorly, but friendly and cheerful. The older ones looked after the younger ones without any objection to wear the older ones' clothes and use their school books. Everyone loved each other very much, and in their big noisy family there was a constant ring of happy children's laughter and the lively voices of the parents. When the little girl was 4 years old, a great misfortune happened. The parents were killed in an accident. In an instant, the children were left orphans. More than anything else in the world, the boys were afraid that they would be separated, scattered in different orphanages. But fortunately, this did not happen. All 4 of them were taken in by their aunt, their father's sister, a withdrawn and gloomy childless widow living in a neighboring village. But was it fortunate? The aunt turned out to be unkind and silent. She never once hugged her nephews, kissed them, or said a kind word to them. She constantly burdened them with housework. The brothers looked after the livestock, and Vivian and little sister kept the house clean and tidy. Already at the age of 5, Vivian was quite an independent child. She could milk goats, feed chickens, geese, rabbits, cook simple dishes, laundry, wash floors, sew buttons. But more than anything else in the world, the girl adored cows. They seemed to her the most beautiful creatures in the world. When you grow up, you'll be a milkmaid, the aunt decided. The older brother stood up for his little sister. Maybe she'll want to study something else after school, go to college, get a serious profession, be a paramedic, nurse or teacher. But the aunt only shook her head. Who needs it? This study of yours. Wasting time over books and ruining your eyesight. She'll go blind, and milkmaids earn good money. You don't have to be an expert. True, despite the fact that her aunt did not approve of sitting at books, Vivian still liked to read. Even before she went to 1st grade, her elders taught her the alphabet and taught her how to put letters into words. A whole new, wonderful world opened up for the girl. She began to run to the village library and borrow different children's books. In order not to be scolded by her aunt, the girl hid the books under her pillow and read them furtively at night, with a flashlight under the blanket. She did well in school, but not brilliantly. Not because she didn't understand the material, but because she didn't have time to study. There was too much homework, and if she had a free moment, Vivian preferred to spend it reading fiction rather than a textbook. Her older sister and brother had finished school and gone to the city to study. The aunt waved her hand at her nephews with annoyance. What can you take from them? She had high hopes for the younger ones, Vivian and her brother Oscar. She hoped that they would stay in the village for the rest of their lives and help their old aunt. There was no one else she could hope for. Oscar immediately decided that he would be, like his father, a tractor driver, and Vivian every year more and more strengthened in the idea of becoming a milkmaid. Although this dream looked quite strange for a young girl. All her peers dreamed of more interesting and prestigious professions, if not a teacher or a doctor, then at least a hairdresser or dressmaker. To work from morning till evening in manure? Yuck, no, not at all, said Vivian's peers. The brother and sister were growing up. Oscar already had his admirers. Every now and then he'd run off to go out with some pretty girl. His aunt used to curse at him as much as she could. First he skips all night, and then during the day he cannot really study at school or work. He sits at home and pecking his nose after his female adventures. Vivian alone did not give her aunt any trouble, helped her with the household chores, studied diligently, did not go out with the boys. Teachers never complained about her. Unlike the same Oscar, who was famous for his ardent and turbulent character and often arranged at school fights and provoked conflicts. By 18 years old, girl blossomed, became pretty as a porcelain doll. Even surprising that in a simple family of ordinary village laborers could appear such a beauty, blue-eyed blonde, thin bones, slender figure, graceful elongated hands and fingers, as if a ballerina or a pianist. And with such delicate, fragile fingers you were going to be a milkmaid. Oscar laughed at her. But Vivian was not offended. She was confident in her abilities. The village boys began to look at the girl. Classmates, Oscar's friends whistled admiringly after her, tried to walk her home, to make a casual conversation. But Vivian didn't need any of that. She only looked at the next gentleman with a surprised look from under her long eyelashes and hurried home. She had no time for idle talk. She had so much to do. In her senior year of high school, she managed to get a part-time job on a cattle farm. Not full-time, of course. But her boss assured her he'd be happy to hire her permanently after graduation. "Why would you spend years getting a specialized education?" Charles told her. "It's just a piece of paper no one needs. The only thing you have to do is pass a medical exam and get a medical book. Anything you need, you can learn on the job in the process. I can see you have a heart for cows." Vivian listened to Charles with interest. "You know how to approach them. and they are attracted to you. Besides, your health and stamina are excellent. Years young, he glanced approvingly at the girl's handsome figure. I think you will be able to milk perfectly well, and if you don't understand something, our women will teach you everything in no time. Of course, they didn't let her start milking right away. At first, she worked as an assistant to the more experienced Elizabeth and learned under her. Elizabeth was perky, mocking and sharp-tongued, divorced, at that famous Berry woman again age. Rumor had it she was having an affair with Charles himself. That's why he made her head milkmaid on the farm. Actually, the official title of milkmaid was machine milking operator. Vivian had no idea whether it was true or not, the rumors about Elizabeth's affair with the boss, but just in case, like everyone else, pretended not to know anything. Charles had been married for a long time and hardly wanted to publicize his extramarital affairs. And all would be well, but only Vivian began to catch strange, evaluating gazes of her superiors. Charles often began to linger on her and literally devour her with his eyes. Each time she became very uncomfortable. She wanted to shrink back and close herself off, to wipe away the oily residue of his gaze. Until the very last moment, Vivian had convinced herself that she had imagined it. After all, she was completely inexperienced in matters of relationships. But, unfortunately, Charles's attentions became more and more apparent every day. When he dropped in on the milkmaids, he was invariably complimentary. "Ah, Vivian, you're a beauty today. You are blooming and smelling." The girl tried to turn it into a joke. "What do I smell like?" "Dung," she laughed. But the boss was hanging around her, trying to touch her shoulder or thigh as if by accident. Vivian was nervous in his presence, twitching and fidgeting, wishing he would go away. And then Elizabeth began to cast suspicious, jealous glances at her. Vivian felt guilty for no reason and didn't know how to get rid of the intrusive suitor. Directly and rudely send him away she could not, after all, the bosses. Besides, she really needed this job. One day during a break between milking, Elizabeth pinned Vivian in a corner and asked her threateningly, "Why are you making eyes at the boss, you little bitch?" Vivian flared up, frightened, indignant. "I'm not making eyes at anyone," she said. "I need him very much." "Yes, of course you do," Elizabeth squinted incredulously. "You're not as simple as you'd like to make yourself out to be. You're thinking of getting into bed with your boss to make your career, but it's not going to work." "Elizabeth, I had no idea." Vivian was ready to cry. "Honestly, I don't want him." But Elizabeth, apparently, did not believe her and made her lover to find out about the relationship. It ended with Charles scandalously threw her out of the farm and in her place put Vivian. Of course, all the other milkmaids were shocked. To put some inexperienced girl over them, all experienced workers, to boss them around. Then everyone confirmed that Vivian sleeps with the boss and hated her. However, no one dared to offend the chief's mistress openly. But everyone did her some little mischief under the radar. And Charles increased the pressure and began more and more often and more unambiguously cut circles around the young girl. "You are disturbing me." She couldn't stand it any longer. "I need to clean up the machine and the buckets." "Those buckets won't get away from you," Charles whispered hotly, coming close to her, burning her skin with his hot breath. "Oh, you're so sweet. I just can't." Vivian was horrified to see his bulging and wet lips in front of her. Charles had folded them in a bow and apparently expected the girl to kiss him. She shuddered with disgust. Without realizing what she was doing, Vivian fumbled for the pail and slipped it over her boss's head with a clatter. Charles shrieked so loudly that the whole farm could hear. The milkmaids froze when they saw the boss with an empty bucket on his head. But the most sensational thing began next. Suddenly in the crowd appeared Charles's wife, who flew up to her spouse, furious fury. "Who did this?" she shouted, pointing her finger at the bucket and glaring menacingly at those present. Everyone knew that Charles was afraid of his strict wife. It was not surprising, for it was hard not to be timid in front of such a woman. In response to her question, everyone froze, and the chief, hearing his wife's voice, stopped yelling and quickly pulled off his bucket. Charles didn't look so good, of course. His face was flushed red, his sparse hair was sticking from the drops of milk, which was a little left in the bucket. "I repeat the question, who did it?" the wife said in a frightened voice. Everyone remained silent, but they glanced at Vivian. The angry woman also stared at her. The girl turned pale and involuntarily took a step back, as if she was afraid that she was going to grab her hair or scratch her eyes at her. "What is your name?" the woman asked. "Vivian," the poor girl whispered. "Vivian?" Charles's wife asked in amazement. "Isn't she the same Vivian that Elizabeth told me a lot of interesting things about this morning?" Vivian, aghast. "I don't know what she might have told you, but honestly, I haven't done anything wrong." She realized that, angry at her sudden dismissal and offended Elizabeth, had gone straight to her former boss's wife. Apparently, she had told her that her husband was having affairs with a young milkmaid. How was she supposed to justify herself? Everyone here was against her. "I really didn't do anything," Vivian mumbled quietly, lowering her eyes. And the woman suddenly grinned in a way that was not evil at all and said, "Yes, I can see that you haven't. If you'd really been tangling with my husband, you wouldn't have put a bucket on his head." "I guess he was trying to make a move on you, wasn't he?" "I know that old dog," said Charles' wife. "Nicole, that's not true," shyly raised his voice, the hapless suitor. "I had no intention of being interested in this girl. Just look at her. As they say, no face, no figure. I'll fire her immediately, so you don't have to worry." Vivian cried out sorrowfully. She's going to be fired after all. And for what? She didn't do anything wrong. She was just defending her honor. "The only thing I can see is that you got what you deserved," said the wife angrily. "The girl you got was really honest and decent. Don't you dare fire her. Do you understand? She seems to be the only person you can trust here on this farm." All right, Nicole," Charles said. "If you say I don't have to fire her, I won't. Let her work. And don't even think about getting within 2 meters of her," said the wife sternly. "Got it? If I find out you're hitting on girls, I'll rip your ass off." Charles nodded hastily and fearfully. "But Elizabeth, who complained to me, I'll pull your hair out," his wife promised grimly. She was clearly jealous. "What did you have with her?" The wife still long reprimanded Charles, and he only listened to her silently, pulling his head into his shoulders. Yes, with such a wife and really not fun. However, the advantages of Honey's appearance on the farm were still there. First, Vivian would never be fired. And secondly, Charles had stopped his harassment and dirty hints. What hints? He was afraid to even look in Vivian's direction. Soon the girl completely got used to it, and every morning happily ran to work. She was not interested in anything else, even during graduation, when all her classmates went to the river to meet the dawn. Vivian quietly ran away. What dawns? She had her first milking at 0500 hours, and before that she had to remove the manure from under the cows, distribute hay to them, and water her favorites, cute, funny, and trusting calves. By that time my aunt was getting sick more and more often. She had long since retired, and she had almost no strength left to do anything at home or in the vegetable garden. In her old age she became sentimental. She cried all the time, which was not like her at all. She apologized to her niece for not giving her love and affection. Vivian's eyes rounded in surprise, and she waved it away. "Oh, Nancy, please, come on. What do you mean you didn't? If it hadn't been for you, we'd all be in an orphanage. And the fact that you don't like tenderness is not the only thing that shows care and love. You gave us a roof over our heads, a piece of bread. That's priceless. You and Oscar will have your own families," the aunt said, barely audibly wiping away the tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. "He'll get married. You'll get married. You'll have children. And then you won't need me at all. I'll be all alone." Vivian wrinkled her nose and assured her that she would never leave her aunt alone for anything in the world. What would she care about marriage and children? She doesn't think about it at all. She has no time. She has cows instead of children. One morning the girl, having finished the first milking, having fed and cleaned the cows, was going to drink tea and eat a sandwich in her legal break. At that moment, however, Charles came running into the barn. His eyes were burning and his bald head was red. His forehead was glistening with sweat from the exertion. "Come here, all of you," he shouted at the milkmaids. The women surrounded the chief with surprise, not understanding what had happened and why he was so excited. "We have guests, very important guests," Charles blurted out, raising his index finger meaningfully. "We've got to make a good show of it in front of them." "Who else?" "Some kind of inspection," one of the milkmaids asked with displeasure. "Take it higher, a sponsor. More precisely, a client," said the chief with a gasp. "What do you mean?" His subordinates didn't understand. "Have you ever heard the name Alex?" Charles asked. The women furrowed their foreheads, remembering. Vivian remained silent. She had little interest in the outside world and had no idea who Alex was. "Is he a milk billionaire or something?" someone finally guessed. "Exactly," the chief nodded importantly. "The owner of the largest dairy plant in the country. And he's interested in the milk our cows produce on the farm." "Wow," someone gasped. "Wow." It happens Charles was even a little offended. Why not? Do our cows give bad milk? No, it's good milk. But where are we and where is the capital's billionaire? The milkmaids are making a lot of noise. Anyway, it's none of my business and none of yours how he came to us and why he was interested. Charles waved his hand irritably. Our business now is to keep him from changing his mind. We have to get him to sign milk contracts with us. If it works out, we'll be happy then. He will improve the premises and provide us with modern milking machines. The milkmaids murmured approvingly. In general, get ready, he will arrive in half an hour with his entourage, personally inspect our farm, cows, take a sample of milk. And how to get ready. The women didn't understand at once. Charles splashed his hands briefly. How? Get yourself and the cattle in order. Or what? Wash the cows, brush them. They are already clean. The milkmaids took offense. Actually, we take care of our cows without reminders. In short, that everything was clean and beautiful. Now don't let us down. We have to make sure Alex likes it, Charles said, and then he was off, puffing. Oh, if I'd known that a billionaire from the capital was coming to see us, I'd have changed into a fancy dress, laughed one of the milkmaids. What's the point? Hummed another of her co-workers. You'd think these billionaires would look at us as women. And why not? Took offense at the first one. We are probably no worse than their women in the capital. They are all in the very juice, shapely, ruddy. Maybe we're not worse, grinned the third. Only billionaires want others. They have their own standards of beauty, tattooed eyebrows, lips like dumplings, silicone breasts, nails, false eyelashes, and hair. Michelle, the oldest worker on the farm, spat in her heart. Ugh, that's disgusting. That's right, said the younger women. Their wives and mistresses are all fake. But here, let him see the real American beauty. This is not the stuff of the capital. Everyone laughed merrily. Vivian was the only one who didn't join in the fun. The arrival of the milk billionaire left her indifferent. So what if he owned a dairy? What should she do now? Ingratiate herself with him? She didn't care about that at all. At last there were voices and noise outside. Apparently some high-ranking guests had arrived. The dairy maids lined up, ready to greet Alex in full parade. It turned out that the billionaire had indeed arrived not alone, but with a whole entourage. There were also security guards, deputies, a lawyer, and some other people with him. Vivian, who had previously assured herself that she was not the least bit interested in the capital's rich, involuntarily paid attention to one of Alex's companions. He was a young man, quite young, not older than 20 years. The girl was struck by his appearance. She had previously seen such things only in movies about fairy tale princes. The guy had very fine, aristocratic facial features, deep dark eyes, black eyebrows, expressive cheekbones, and beautifully shaped lips. Let me introduce you my only son and the future heir of my business. Alex nodded towards the young man, looking at him with tenderness. Brian, please love and welcome. Love is always welcome, one of the milkmaids joked. The others greeted this remark with laughter. What a pretty boy. Just a candy, whispered someone not far from Vivian. I could eat him up. But the heir himself was clearly not thrilled about the visit to the cowshed. On the contrary, it looked as if he could hardly contain his disgust. What a smell, he muttered under his breath. Squeamishly, it seemed quiet, but Vivian heard him. It's manure, she told him quietly. The boy stirred and looked up at her. What? I said it smells like manure, Vivian explained, feeling her heart flutter. It's a strong odor that makes you dizzy when you're not used to it. Then you get used to it, and it's okay. Brian looked at her with interest. So you work here? She nodded. I work right here. The young man looked at her carefully. First he looked at her face, huge blue eyes with long eyelashes, full pink lips, dimples on her cheeks, and then at her slender, well-built figure. He seemed pleased with what he saw. Doesn't the smell bother you? He asked with interest. Vivian shook her head. I don't notice it anymore, and I don't have time for that. I have a lot of work to do. In the meantime, Alex looked closely and in detail at the barn, cows and calves, asking questions. How many times a day do you milk? He asked Michelle, who was the oldest and therefore looked more solid. It is known how many. Twice, she said, as it should be, at 0500 and at 1700. It's not enough. Alex shook his head. We should switch to 3 milkings a day to increase the numbers. Charles nodded obsequiously. If you say so, Alex, we should do it. We will. We'll schedule the second milking for 1100. Here Vivian could not keep silent and loudly indignant. But this is not right. All eyes immediately turned to her. Alex frowned. What do you mean you can't? Nice girl. Charles discreetly made scary eyes and poked Vivian in the side. Vivian is just joking, isn't she? But she wasn't so easily confused either. With a determined shake of her head, Vivian repeated stubbornly. You can't milk cows 3 times a day in winter, unless they're dairy cows and recently calved. Which ones? The young man asked her quickly. Vivian glanced in his direction, blushed, but still explained. Recently calved. They usually have the most milk, but for all the others, milking 3 times a day is not suitable. Why is that? Alex was interested. Vivian, a little embarrassed to be in the center of attention, still gathered her thoughts and explained. The cow is not a mechanism. She needs rest and rest. For a year or 2, of course, she will give more milk, but then she will just wear out. You can do it in summer, but not in winter. Why can you do it in the summer? Brian asked. Because you don't have to feed the cows. They get all the nutrients they need from the pasture. If they eat a lot of greens, the milk yields go up. Bite your tongue, Charles hissed. He turned pale with anger, clenching his teeth. But Alex, hearing his retort, waved his hand in protest. Why not? Let the girl speak. She offers quite reasonable things. I can see that she knows what she's talking about. Vivian only shrugged her shoulders, not knowing what else to say. The guests continued their tour first in the barn, and then in the farm as a whole. The dairy maids remained waiting for Charles' return and wondered whether the Moscow billionaire would sign a contract with them or not. Well, Vivian, you gave away. One of the milkmaids scolded her. Who asked you to get ahead and speak? If the deal falls through, Charles will take it out on all of us. The girl realized that it would have been better to bite her tongue, but she couldn't keep quiet. "What was I supposed to do?" she asked, almost through her tears. Silently watched the cows being mocked. For them, a cow is just an abstract source of milk. But for me, they are like family. They should be cherished. God be with them. With cows, someone waved his hand. Did you notice the way his son looked at you? Vivian blushed to the roots of her hair. You're not imagining things, Vivian objected. It was nothing like that. He just stood there and looked at you with his eyes slammed shut and looked so interested the girls insisted. It was nice to hear that, though I didn't believe it for a second. Why would that be? Brian? Interested in me? Don't he have enough hot girls of his own? There's plenty of them in New York. He's so handsome, someone said dreamily. Oh, he probably breaks girls' hearts left and right. Spoiled. That's all, said another milkmaid. He smells like manure. He didn't like it. Tell me, please, what a sissy. He's not a sissy, said Vivian, standing up for Brian. He's just not used to it yet. The milkmaids looked at each other meaningfully and laughed. Well, it's all clear. Vivian fell in love. The boy is handsome. Oh, come on. That's nonsense. The girl pulled the headscarf off her head and flew out of the cowshed. The capital's guests signed the contract after all. Charles set the table in the dining room and gave a generous meal to all the farm workers. It's like a rustic corporate party. True, the boss couldn't resist reprimanding Vivian. But why did you get involved? Why did you speak up? Couldn't you keep your mouth shut? Such a lucrative contract almost ruined because of you. You, Charles, Vivian shouted angrily at him from the corner of her eye. Are you willing to kill animals for a lucrative contract? Charles was embarrassed. Why do you start at once to kill? I love our cows as much as you do, by the way. Vivian squinted incredulously. Yes, of course. You still can't remember their names. To you, all cows look alike. But to me, they're all like people. Each one has its own personality, its own looks. Oh, you'll get a deal from me, Charles wagged his finger. I'll cut your salary. You have no right, bravely responded the girl. I give you the highest milk yields, and I take care of the cows like children. They are always clean, nourished, and caressed. That's why their milk is so delicious. All right, all right. The chief waved his hands at her with annoyance. I know that you can talk about your cows for hours. Just be thankful Alex likes you. Which one? One of the two, Vivian asked timidly, feeling hope flare in her chest. Which one? Alex, of course. She was deeply disappointed, but she tried not to show it. But watch it, Vivian, her boss warned her. They're going to be here a lot now, so please keep quiet. Don't speak. Vivian grasped the phrase with incredulous joy often. Or are they going to come all the way from New York every time? Why come? Alex has a place here. Have you seen that house by the lake? Vivian gasped. But of course she remembered and knew that house, not just a house, but a mansion, a real mansion. Vivian had only seen them in movies, about old landlords and serfs. But she'd never seen the massive, heavy gates open and anyone go in or out. There was no dog barking or human voices on the other side, so Vivian assumed no one lived in the house. Turns out it belonged to Alex's family. It's kind of like a summer house, Charles said condescendingly. They don't live there year-round. Of course, so they come on weekends. Yes, on holidays. But they'll come more often now, anyway. I wonder, Vivian thought furtively, as if afraid that someone might overhear her thoughts. Will Brian come with his father? He's in the family business, too. What if I never see him again? Thinking about it was strangely painful. Why was she so caught up in it? After all, she had only seen this young man for a short time, but she'd already lost her head over him. The next encounter was quicker than she had hoped. Frankly speaking, Vivian now often walked near Alex's mansion when she had a break from the farm. In the winter, the village boys and girls would have a skating rink on the frozen lake. Vivian would grab her old skates and skate across the ice, glancing out the windows of the stately mansion. It was silly, of course, what could be seen from afar, but she hoped anyway. One day, disappointed that she had failed to see anyone again, she got ready to go home, and at that very moment a luxurious car pulled up to the gates of the mansion. The girl did not know about car brands, but it was clearly a very cool, expensive and tricked out one. Vivian froze, staring at the tinted windows of the car. The driver's side door swung open and Brian emerged from the car. The girl's heart nearly burst with excitement. At this time, as if sensing her gaze, Brian raised his head and saw Vivian. She first blushed, then turned pale and confused, frantically considered what to do. Say hello, pretend she didn't recognize her, run away? Brian was the first to break the silence, waving cheerfully at her. Hey, hello, Vivian. She even looked around in panic. Was this him addressing her or someone else? But there was no one else nearby, and then she nodded back in a nonchalant manner. Brian said, smiling, approaching her. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of her chest. You can call me you, Brian said, coming up close to her. I'm not much older than you. How old are you? 19? The girl was so excited she couldn't even remember her own age. Well, I'm 21. So don't give me a hard time about it. He wagged his finger at her playfully. What's your name again? Vivian. Vivian, huh? Unusual. Very exotic, he grinned. I'm Brian. I remember, Vivian said, and then bit her tongue. Now he'd guessed that she'd been thinking about him for days. But the young man paid no attention to this. His gaze was now fixed on the skates which Vivian hung on her shoulder. Have you been skating? He asked with interest. The ice is firm. It holds, she nodded. Oscar can even drive a tractor across the lake in winter. Brian's eyebrows rose questioningly. Who's Oscar? Your boyfriend? No, Vivian shook her head. He's my brother. He looked at her face curiously and unashamedly. Do you have a boyfriend? Or maybe a husband? You country folk marry early. Vivian blushed almost to tears. I have no one, she said angrily. No boyfriend, no husband. Why is that? He seemed to be amused by her embarrassment and continued to question her with amused interest. She seemed so pretty. I would even say beautiful. He raised his hand and touched Vivian's cheek. His palm was hot, and Vivian recoiled as if she had been burned. I'm not like that, she shouted, and she ran away. Later at home, after she had escaped the anxious inquiries of Oscar's aunt, Vivian crawled away from the gaze of others to the stove, and there, in tears, scolded herself for her own foolishness. That she was indeed like a savage. I'm not, she mocked herself, and even groaned with annoyance. Brian must have thought her a complete fool. Uneducated, an idiot too, making a tragedy out of nothing. He must have laughed. Stupid redneck. She remembered over and over again that scalding touch on her skin and died of shame and regret that she hadn't let him continue. She wondered what he would do next. What if he had kissed her? The mere thought of his lips made her sweetly dizzy. There it was, she'd had her chance, and she'd blown it. It was unlikely Brian would look in her direction now, even if they ever met again. To her great surprise, however, the young man himself sought her out, came to the barn the next morning, and asked for Vivian. The milkmaid sent him in the right direction in a flash, giggling softly. When the girl saw Brian, she almost died on the spot. But the young man looked at her directly and openly, obviously not angry or mocking her for yesterday's behavior. Vivian, what do you do in the evenings? He asked her. She flared up. God, was he really going to ask her out on a date? Or maybe to a club for dancing or a movie? How scary. And how exciting. Realizing that the pause had gone on too long, Vivian blurted out. It's usually nothing special. I want to take you to dinner tonight, Brian said. Dinner? She asked in confusion. Was he asking her to go to a cafe? There were no proper restaurants in the village. There was only one modest cafe, which also served as a bar, more like a beer hall. Yes, Brian nodded. My place. Your place, Vivian repeated after him, feeling confused. Brian laughed. Look, I don't think you're thinking straight. To my house, the same house we met at yesterday. Remember? I remember. Vivian nodded awkwardly. He invites her to dinner at this luxurious mansion. Really? What's the occasion? She asked timidly at last. Do you have a holiday? A birthday? Maybe? No holiday. Just a nice, warm family dinner, Brian explained. Vivian didn't know what she had to do with a warm family gathering, but she didn't dare to ask the question head-on. So, do you agree? Brian rushed her. She nodded confusedly. I do. Good, he was pleased. I expect you by 8 o'clock this evening. Then, you'll be done here by then. He nodded at the cows. I will, Vivian replied. Then, I'll see you tonight. He smiled at her in a way that made her stomach feel warm and cozy, and waved goodbye and walked quickly out of the barn. Apparently the thick and strong smell of manure had gotten to him. Vivian was going out with the whole farm. The milkmaids at first did not believe that this major and handsome man had invited a girl to visit him, but Vivian had such a charming and happy look that it was clear that she was not lying. You probably don't have any fancy clothes, sighed the milkmaids. Nothing. I'll lend you my dress. I wore it to my sister's wedding in the city. I bought it specially for the occasion. It's very beautiful. And I'll give you my pearl beads. I'll give you my shoes. I'll do your makeup, Vivian. You don't know how to put on makeup, do you? Oscar and his aunt were the only ones who took the news that Vivian had been invited to dinner without much enthusiasm. "It's strange," his brother said glumly. "Usually rich guys like us don't even consider people like us as people." "Strange indeed," agreed the aunt. "Oh, I don't like all this. I don't know if this rich man is up to something bad." Vivian was angry and offended to the point of tears. "What's all this about?" she shouted. "You shouldn't be happy for the man. You've ruined the mood." "Understand, this is the backwoods. We want to do good," Oscar started, approaching his sister, but she shoved his hand away. "And if you want to do good, then just stay out of the way. Let me be happy for a little while. What good have I seen in my life except a barn?" Oscar and his aunt looked at each other, but didn't say anything. Vivian arrived at Alex's mansion early, afraid of being late. It was 07:40 on the clock, and all these 20 minutes she walked not far from the gate, not wanting to seem intrusive. When the appointed hour finally arrived, she felt frozen to the bone. She pressed the button, and a stern voice sounded from the intercom. "Who is it?" She was confused. "I'm Vivian. Brian asked me to dinner." "Come in." The voice was impassive, and the gate slid open silently. Vivian stepped into the courtyard, clutching her shoe bag tighter than a schoolgirl. She was met at the door by an elderly woman in uniform dress, obviously a servant. She took Vivian's modest coat and hung it on the coat rack. The girl was shy. Probably the housekeeper was used to seeing guests in expensive mink coats, and here she was with her old coat, but there was nowhere to go. None of the dairymaids on the farm had decent outerwear for winter. Mostly everyone wears down jackets, cheap and practical. "Come into the dining room," the housekeeper nodded, noticing that Vivian was frozen in the middle of the hallway, looking around in confusion. "Oh, Mama, I wish I knew where the dining room was." Vivian had never seen such rich houses before, only in the movies, of course. Now she was struck by everything: the plaster moldings on the ceiling, the gold trim, the spiral staircase to the second floor, and the exquisite antique furniture. "Straight ahead and to the right," said the housekeeper, realizing her predicament. "Thank you," the girl thanked her and moved in the direction indicated. The doors of the dining room were open. Bright electric light and muffled voices were heard. On her way out, Vivian glanced at the huge gilt-framed mirror that hung on the wall. She pulled her dress off her shoulder, adjusted her beads, and stepped into the dining room with the air of a thea. There was silence as she entered. The soft conversation immediately died down. The people at the table stared at her. Vivian nodded hesitantly, recognizing Alex. "Hello?" Next to the owner of the house sat a beautiful, well-groomed woman, and not even just a woman, but an elegant lady of about 40 to 45 years old. Apparently, this was the wife of the dairy magnate. She was also Brian's mother. Looking around the room, Vivian was finally relieved to find Brian himself. He was sitting a little farther away, on the opposite side of the table. "Hello," she nodded to him. "Oh, Vivian, you're here." The young man rejoiced, rising to meet her and taking a few steps in her direction. Once there, he took her hand and led her solemnly to the table. "Mom, Dad, meet Vivian. The one I told you about." "The one I told you about," the mother said. Not looking away from the girl, Alex frowned, remembering. "A milkmaid on the farm, if I'm not mistaken." "You're not mistaken," Vivian answered quietly, feeling more and more awkward. There was something going on between the three of them, father, mother, and son, that Vivian could not understand. It was as if they had all learned their roles, but she had forgotten to read the text. That was why she was standing there now, her eyes fluttering and her gaze shifting from one to the other. Her mother clutched her heart like an opera singer. "Oh, what are you so shocked about, Mom?" Brian asked calmly. "We honor every kind of work. Haven't you told me that many times yourself?" "Vivian, sit down," he said with exaggerated gallantry as he led her to the table and pulled out a chair for her. The dinner, which was supposed to be one of the most memorable and colorful events in Vivian's simple life, had turned into a torment for her. She didn't know how to approach all the many cutlery items, so she ate very little. She would watch which knife or fork Brian took and repeat after him. "Why do you eat so little?" Vivian asked the young man, and she answered quietly that she had no appetite. "Vivian," asked Brian's mother at last, drilling her with a glance, "how long have you known my son?" "It's been a week now," she said artlessly. "A week?" The woman raised her eyes to the ceiling. "Jesus, that's crazy. All right, I know my son. He can do a lot of things out of stubbornness. But you, how could you agree to this adventure?" She turned to Vivian, and she just clapped her eyelashes together in incomprehension. What adventure? Well, yes, continued her mother, unheeding. I understand. Brian is a rich, handsome boy. And I suppose you want to get out of your old life and into a new one, but to consent to marriage after a week's acquaintance. Vivian had just taken a sip of juice from a tall glass and choked. Vivian tried to catch her breath out of surprise. What marriage consent? What marriage? She spoke with difficulty, clearing her throat. I don't understand. And when Brian slapped his forehead theatrically, Vivian, darling, I forgot to ask you the most important thing of all. Will you marry me? Brian was a late, only and therefore beloved and terribly spoiled child. His parents had never denied him anything, shook over him, guessed every wish and fulfilled the slightest whim. Since childhood, he received everything he wanted, and the boy wanted a lot. Every year more and more. First expensive toys, then tricked-out gadgets, then a motorcycle, a car, an apartment. His parents chewed him out with a soft smile for being wasteful, but in the end they still went along with it. Obviously, whatever the child is not a child, as long as it does not cry. Meanwhile, Brian did not want to study or work. His father managed with great difficulty to cram him into the university, but his son studied poorly. Or rather, he didn't study at all. Barely crawled from course to course. Thanks to Alex's connections, the teachers, gritting their teeth, drew C's in his report card, and his father made a scandal after every session, demanding from Brian to get his head on straight. You're my only heir, his father raged. Who am I going to leave my business to if you don't know anything about it? Maybe I don't want to be a businessman, Brian waved it off lazily. And anyway, I haven't had my fun yet. I want to live for myself, and you're making me feel obligated. Oh, to live for yourself, Dad was furious. You mean spending time in clubs and bars with your friends and gores? Brian grinned, showing off his blindingly white teeth. But at least it's more fun than working your pants off in an office, ruining your eyesight and poring over business papers. It's nothing, his wife tried to console Alex. He'll get over it. He'll be happy and settle down. But time passed, and Brian was not going to settle down. His patience broke at the moment when Alex found out that Brian had an affair with a stripper. He met this girl of questionable behavior in a strip club, started showering her with gifts and attention, and she predictably gave in, and all would have been fine. But Brian fell in love and said he wanted to marry Kayla. That was the stripper's name. And that's when the house first erupted in an uproar. Over my dead body, Alex shouted in a terrible voice. I'm not giving you a dime for this wedding, and I'm not giving you another dime. If you want to get married, but then you have to support your young wife and earn your own money from a wife and a place to live. Because your Kayla will never live in our house. He could, of course, slam the door nicely and really leave his parents' house. But Brian wasn't an idiot. When emotions cooled a little, the young man realized that without his father's help he really could not live. He had never once in his life earned even a loaf of bread. All his needs and whims were paid for by his father. Even cell phone service and internet. Brian had absolutely no money-making or saving skills. He was poor as a church mouse. Even if he sold the car, he wouldn't have enough to pay for his wedding or rent his own place, living on his wife's money. But Kayla had promised him she'd leave the stripping to him after the wedding. Anyway, there was no rash action in this case. You had to think things through and try to find a compromise. But what kind of compromise could there be if his father didn't even want to hear about Kyle? Brian had tried several times to turn his father in his girlfriend's favor. He started acting interested in his father's business. He even went with him to the farm and visited the cow barn so his father would appreciate his efforts. But all to no avail. No, absolutely, once and for all. I will never allow this marriage. Don't disgrace me, he shouted at Brian, remember, any, but not Kayla. Brian lifted his chin stubbornly and glared defiantly at his father. Anybody. Then he gritted his teeth. Either one, Alex waved his head firmly. Well, Brian had a brilliant idea, as it seemed to him. Anyone, so anyone will choose. Vivian from the cowshed had happened by chance. Brian noticed at once the eyes this country shepherdess was looking at him with. She addressed him as if he were a deity. Getting her involved in his plan was a piece of cake. I must tell my parents that I'm going to marry Vivian, it dawned on him. Brian was pretty sure that option would please them even less than it would Kyle. His father would probably freak out and quickly agree to marry Kayla. He didn't care about Vivian or her feelings at all. She was just a bargaining chip. So what if some milkmaid was staring at him, mouth open, eyes flapping, looking at him with adoration? It's a laugh, that's all. Inviting the girl to dinner, Brian had already warned his parents that he was going to get married. Of course, he didn't tell Vivian about his plans. He was sure she would agree. The scene in the dining room amused him. The looks on both his parents' faces. His father's face had nearly given him a stroke. So Brian continued, "Will you give me your consent?" "Dad?" Vivian froze next to him, speechless. She and Alex were dumbfounded, shifting their gazes from one to the other. She hadn't said yes to him yet, but Brian had no doubt that in her heart she would follow him to the ends of the earth. His father puffed noisily, poured himself a glass of mineral water and drained it, setting it on the table with a clatter. He stared hard at Vivian. Well, Brian thought to himself, nice bride. He'd asked for it. He was sure that against the plain, indescribable Vivian, his Kayla looked like a real queen, stylish, well-groomed, with a perfect body honed by hours of fitness and stripping. So Dad's gonna have to go along with it. He's the one who got Brian on the spot. Anybody but Kayla now. Let him be happy to get anyone. Let him compare and regret his decision. But suddenly things didn't go according to plan. Once more pouring himself some water and drinking, her father scrutinized Vivian again, first from head to toe and then back from top to toe. Well, Alex said hoarsely, "Then so be it." Brian was wary. "What do you mean?" Dad grinned. "I'll marry her. I can see she's a nice girl, so I don't mind." Brian thought he'd misheard. "Are you joking now?" he asked hopefully. Even his mother, who had been standing silent until then, gasped and covered her mouth with her palm. "Alex, what are you talking about?" she exclaimed. "What's wrong?" "My father had miscalculated. I'm a man of my word. If I promised, I keep my promise." Vivian seemed to be the only one in the company who didn't understand what they were talking about. What promise? In fact, no one paid any attention to her at all, as if she wasn't even here. Father and son stared defiantly at each other, and the mother tossed between them, trying to find a compromise. Dad Brian raised his voice. "I'm not in the mood for silly shenanigans right now." Alex shook his head seriously. "I'm not joking around, and I'm not playing a prank on you, son. I do give my paternal consent to this marriage, and will even help organize the wedding." Of course, Vivian said yes. She had never dreamed of such happiness literally falling on her head. The most beautiful man in the world, Brian Olenikov, offered her hand and heart. She did not even think about the fact that such a hasty proposal looks a little strange. Could it be that Brian had fallen in love with her so quickly that he wanted to take her as his wife? On the other hand, she urged herself, why not? Don't these things happen in life? It happens. She herself had fallen in love with Brian practically at first sight. Vivian had no idea how father and son had yelled at each other after she'd left. "Did you set that up on purpose?" Brian resented her. "Yes, to make a fool of me." "I think it was your intention to make a fool of me," his father retorted. "But you didn't. Nobody pulled your tongue. You said you were going to marry that girl." "You're just being a jackass," Brian continued to shout, punishing me on principle. "Did it occur to you that I might actually marry that hillbilly?" "I did," my father nodded. "If you're going to do it to the end. If you yourself announce that you are going to marry a milkmaid, if you propose to her in public, then marry her. You have to be responsible for your words. And you want your only son to marry you." There was a squeamish grimace on Brian's face. "Why not? At least I'm much more sure of that girl's purity and decency than I am of your Kayla's morals and principles," his father said. "I'm going to get married," Brian yelled almost hysterically. "Get married, son," Alex nodded. "Mary, we'll give you a big wedding right here in the village." That's how Vivian became the milkmaid's bride. At first, of course, they didn't believe her. "Oh, stop making things up, friend," they told her the next morning in the barn. "Well, a guy invited you to dinner once, well, with his parents. But even if he kissed you in a secluded corner, and you've already made up that he wants to marry you." Vivian took offense. "I wasn't imagining anything. He proposed to me in front of my father and mother." "It doesn't work that way," the women looked at each other, shaking their heads. "Billionaires don't marry milkmaids. This is not a soap opera." However, what was their surprise when at the end of the working day in the cowshed appeared a refined lady, Alex's wife, Brian's mother. She strode grimly through the barn, occasionally bringing a perfumed handkerchief to her face, or even squeamishly covering her nose. The women fell silent, staring at the stranger. Her coat alone was worth more than the entire closet of each of them. Vivian was the only one who recognized the intruder at once. "Oh, hello," Vivian said, daring to say hello. Matilda gave her a cold look and asked, "Is your workday over?" Vivian nodded hesitantly. "Then we'll go into town to pick out your wedding dress at the salon." "Oh," Vivian gasped. "Why a salon?" "I wanted to order it from Grandma Grace, the dressmaker. She's a great wedding dressmaker." "And it will be cheaper than in a salon, child," sarcastically said the future mother-in-law, Forget I wanted cheaper. Brian's wife should have the best, the most expensive. The milkmaids listened to the conversation with avid curiosity and only had time to wonder, was it really true? Brian had proposed to Vivian. Such a thing does not happen in life. But the wedding did take place. Brian had hoped it would be a quiet affair, but it didn't. As if in retaliation for all his bachelorhood, his father decided to organize a big and loud wedding to attract as much attention as possible. It was as if he wanted to embarrass his own son on purpose. The news headlines screamed, "A modern-day Cinderella tale, billionaire's son marries milkmaid," and Brian gritted his teeth with impotent rage. Yes, and friends, having learned the news, literally pelted him with questions and ridicule. However, when the media leaked photos of the young bride, malcontents somehow hushed in silence. The bride was miraculously good in a snow-white dress, which favorably emphasized all the curves of her dainty and slender figure, but did not look provocative or vulgar. The best makeup artist was working on her makeup, and the best stylist had done an elaborate hairstyle on her head. Vivian looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Was this really her, a simple country girl? Was she marrying the most real, beautiful prince, better and more beautiful than him in the world? The prince, by the way, was also impressed by the change. He had probably already resigned himself to the idea that he did not want to marry a village girl, and now he was faced with a delicate, awe-inspiring fairy. Vivian was just as good as Kayla in appearance, Brian grudgingly admitted to himself. Still, he was not happy about the marriage, realizing how cleverly his father had tricked him. However, the young man did not intend to remain the spouse of this naive girl for a long time. You just need to put his father's vigilance, get access to finances, save more money, and then quietly divorce and build happiness with another, with the one with whom he himself wants. However, his father was more cunning than Brian thought. After the marriage ceremony in the registry office, when the whole crowd was going to an expensive restaurant rented for the wedding, Alex strictly told his son, "Don't think you can go back to your stripper. I've got it all worked out. I've got it all documented with a lawyer. If you file for divorce from Vivian, you'll lose my financial support completely." Brian squinted his eyes angrily. "Did you put me in this trap on purpose?" he whispered. "Dad, do you really want me to spend the rest of my life with an uneducated, stupid milkmaid?" "She's not that stupid," Dad said. "And what are you boasting about your education? In fact, all credits and exams I bought you, so don't think that you are smarter than your wife. And in some worldly and domestic matters she'll give you 100 points ahead of her." Brian turned away from his father and looked at his new wife. She was happy, smiling, looking at him with a shy tenderness. How naive should one be to believe that he was really serious about her? On their wedding night, Vivian had shocked Brian by the fact that he was her first man. Frankly, he'd thought girls like that didn't exist anymore, gone like the dinosaurs. So they could keep their innocence until they were 19. But then, Brian thought, she'd never seen anything but cows in her life. No wonder she'd never dated a guy. Whatever he said, it flattered him. After the wedding, Vivian continued to reverently catch his every word, looking into his eyes, trying to anticipate every wish. Sometimes it annoyed him, just pissed him off. Well, what kind of naive girl got him as a wife? What kind of a wife is that? She can't say a word against her. Vivian's older brother and sister from town came to the wedding. They could not believe that their sister got one of the most eligible bachelors in New York, but the other brother, Oscar, an aunt, who lived in the village. They did not accept the young man. They looked at Brian warily and unfriendly, as if every second they were waiting for some trick from him. Brian was angry and resentful. Who do these commoners think they are? They should be praying to him for marrying this country girl. However, at the wedding, Oscar approached the groom and, leaning toward him from the height of his Bogatyrsky height, quietly said, "If you try to offend Vivian, I'll kill you." Brian looked at his powerful shoulders, which were clearly too tight in the new jacket, and muttered reluctantly, "I won't. Don't worry." He didn't want to get mixed up with the big man. Vivian had to give up her job at the farm. Alex said that it was not suitable for his daughter-in-law to carry manure and milk cows. Not in status, not in position. "You are not a stupid girl. You need to study," said her father-in-law. "Maybe in the future you will help me in business. At least you know much more than I do about cattle, milk yields, and other things." Vivian did not dare to argue with her father-in-law, but still, deep down, she longed for her cows and her milkmaid friends. But she at least tried to be useful in the house, helped the servants with cleaning, the cook with cooking. Everywhere tried to be on time. Everywhere was indispensable. My mother-in-law at first grudgingly wrinkled her nose and grumbled at her country ways, but then, noticing how everything changed in the house, with the appearance of Vivian for the better, stopped wrinkling her face. This girl created an atmosphere of warmth, harmony, and comfort around her. In her society, everyone was easy, pleasant, and calm. And of course, Vivian was working on books, preparing to enter the university. Alex gave her a computer, taught her to use the internet with confidence, and soon the girl took many study materials from the network. But with Brian, unfortunately, the relationship with Vivian was not very happy. She tried to be a good wife, she tried very hard, but Brian looked at her as an empty place, not noticing. He went to her only at night, and during the day young beautiful wife for him as if did not exist. 2 months after the wedding, Vivian, helping the cook prepare breakfast in the kitchen, suddenly looked at the sizzling pan and felt that she felt sick. The smell and sight of bacon and eggs suddenly seemed so disgusting that she clasped her mouth with the palm of her hand and rushed out of the kitchen toward the bathroom. Her mother-in-law watched the girl hugging the toilet thoughtfully and then philosophically said, "I think we should make an appointment for you to see a gynecologist. It seems to me, my dear, that you are pregnant." Pregnant? Vivian almost choked with happiness. Could it really be true? A child was the most precious thing she could give her husband. Brian would surely be overjoyed when he heard the news. Maybe he'll be a little softer, a little more affectionate. They say children make a marriage stronger. The mother-in-law took her daughter-in-law to a doctor she knew. She confirmed the pregnancy and rejoiced with the news. It turns out that Vivian will have twins. Unfortunately, Brian was not too happy to hear that he was going to be a father. He seemed to be even more distant from his young wife, became withdrawn and taciturn. Vivian was at a loss to understand what had happened, what she had done wrong. Did he not want children, or did he dislike her after she became pregnant? But the fact remained that her pregnancy was of far more concern to her mother-in-law than her own husband. Brian almost stopped paying attention to her, never spoke to her, or even looked in her direction. In the 9th month of her pregnancy, Vivian overheard a fragment of their conversation with her father as she passed by her father-in-law's office. The door was ajar, and the voices could be heard clearly. "Are you happy now?" "Yes," Brian asked bitterly. "I'm bound now. Is that what you wanted?" "All I wanted was for my son to finally grow up and become an independent person who can take real responsibility for himself and for others," Alex answered sharply. "What are you fussing like a child for? Here's a family for you. A young wife. Soon there will be children too. Take care of them instead of whining." "You know very well I didn't want this marriage," Brian shouted. Vivian shuddered and turned pale when she heard this, and then pressed her back against the wall so that the two men wouldn't see her. "You literally forced me to marry that country girl. You wanted to punish me. Well, congratulations, punished. But I don't want to live with her anyway. I don't want to, and I won't. You understand?" Vivian swallowed her tears and hurried away. So that's how it is. It was all a lie. Brian had never loved her, and his parents knew it. Brian didn't want her or the little ones. Vivian wept bitterly, burying her face in her pillow to muffle the sounds. All her hopes, all her dreams had turned to dust. And why had she believed fairy tales were possible? It was clear from the start that miracles don't happen. Billionaires don't fall in love with country girls. That's true. But why? Why did she find out too late? And the next morning it turned out Brian was missing, just vanished without a trace. The night before, Vivian had gone to bed early, citing a headache and refusing to eat dinner. She couldn't see anyone right now, didn't want to talk to anyone, and so she had no memory of what time Brian had come in, or whether he'd even come to the bedroom to spend the night. But in the morning, when she woke up, he had taken some of his things and documents, gotten into his car, and driven off in an unknown direction. His cell phone was unavailable. Maybe he'd changed his SIM card. Alex was furious. Dad's a jerk. Ungrateful. How dare he abandon his pregnant wife, take all the cash from the safe and run away. Bastard, he screamed. Matilda tried to calm him down, convinced him that perhaps the boy had just gone for a vacation and would return, but Alex continued to swear at her. He was no longer a boy, but a big man. How many times can you act like a kindergartner? And it was as if everyone had forgotten about Vivian, and she was probably the worst of all. Her beloved husband left her, ran away from her. He'd run away because Brian couldn't bear to live with her. It was humiliating and hard to realize. However, when the first shock passed, the mother-in-law came to her senses and paid attention to the girl. Matilda made her go to bed and calm down. She was not allowed to worry. Alex assured her that she had nothing to worry about. No one would give her a hard time. They would take care of her without Brian, but despite the fact that their tone was sincere and their words affectionate, Vivian felt alien, unnecessary, superfluous in this huge, rich house. A couple of weeks later, the labor began. Her father-in-law took her to the hospital where she was to give birth under contract. Everything was paid in advance. Highly qualified doctors, almost painless labor, a separate comfortable room. But the only person who was really needed now, her husband, was not there. However, when she was shown her babies for the first time, Vivian felt like crying with happiness. 2 tiny babies, so funny, so cute, so beautiful. The sons looked just like Brian. The in-laws were very happy about their grandchildren, hugged and kissed Vivian, congratulated and thanked her. But she realized that deep down it was all a sham. Brian had married her out of spite for her parents, and they had just pretended to accept her. She was a stranger to them. her and her children. When she was due to be discharged from the hospital, Vivian, without a word to anyone, packed ahead of time, took her babies, and called a cab through an app on her phone. She had the money in her account. "Doesn't anyone meet you?" The nurses and nannies marveled. No, Vivian shook her head, holding both her sons to her chest. "I'll get home on my own." Naturally, she didn't go to the Olenikovs. Vivian gave the cab driver her old address in the village. Oscar and his aunt were surprised to see Vivian back, but they were more pleased. They helped to arrange the babies on the big bed, sat the young mother at the table, and poured tea from the samovar. "Did you leave your husband for good, Vivian?" the aunt asked cautiously. "For good," she nodded. "Well, I didn't leave him. He left me first." "I'll kill the bastard." Oscar jumped up immediately. "I warned him." "If only there were someone to kill." Vivian grinned wryly. "He's been missing for a month, and I haven't seen him." She briefly told them all she knew. The aunt shook her head disapprovingly. "Oh, he's a bad boy. He hasn't grown up at all. He's trying to be a husband, so he made a mess of things." "Listen," Oscar suddenly asked worriedly, "and your parents-in-law will not want to take away the children. After all, they are their grandchildren." Vivian imagined this horror for a moment, but immediately responded, "They have no right. I am their mother, according to the law." "What's the law?" Oscar waved his hand, as if you don't know these rich people. "They bribe whoever they want, and the law doesn't apply to them." Vivian became afraid. What if the Olenikovs really wanted to take away her grandchildren? As if in answer to her thoughts, there was a loud knock at the door. Oscar winked at his sister, made a sign to keep silent, went out into the hall and shouted loudly and angrily. "Who is there?" Our own came a voice from the street that Vivian almost fainted when she recognized it. It was Brian. "I'm sorry," said the young man to his wife, kneeling in front of her and holding her hands in his. "I had been such a fool. I was blind and deaf. I didn't want to see the obvious." "Like what, exactly?" Vivian said carefully. "Like the fact that you really love me. Me, not my money." Vivian shrugged her shoulders in surprise. "I've never really cared about your money. I would have loved you beggar, barefoot and homeless." "There you go," Brian sighed. "And the girl I thought loved me kicked me out when I came to her with my things. She said I was a fool for cutting off my relationship with my father. Without his financial support, she wasn't interested in me anymore. I couldn't give her expensive gifts anymore, and when I ran out of money, she just told me to fuck off." "With how much do you love her?" Biting her lip to keep from crying, Vivian asked. Honestly, Brian thought for a moment. "I don't think I've loved her for a long time. I was drawn to her because it was forbidden fruit. It's known to be the sweetest. But at the core, she's a complete stranger to me. We're not made for each other. Especially since I have you. You, Vivian, Nika, and our babies." Brian glanced at the bed where his sons slept. "Look at you," Oscar said glumly. "Vivian, don't you want a toy? I can drop it if I want to, pick it up if I want to. Why the hell do you need such a fickle husband? You'd better get out of here, buddy, before I count all your bones." Vivian gasped. "Oscar, what are you?" "Oscar." The brother was angry. Why does this guy think he can get away with anything so easily? "He's right," Brian nodded. "What I did to you was despicable, and I deserve to be punished. But just know that I'm willing to wait as long as it takes and hope that one day you'll forgive me." Vivian shook her head. "You won't?" Brian asked sadly. She shook her head again. "I already have, silly," and in a moment he had his wife in his arms. Of course, Oscar and his aunt were still a little grumpy about the fickle man, and it was obvious that they wouldn't learn to trust him again right away, as unconditionally and wholeheartedly as Vivian had trusted him. But time heals in Brian's mind and soul. Something had really changed since he'd broken up with that stripper Kayla. Maybe he finally realized who in his life was truly important and needed and who were casual acquaintances. Vivian wasn't casual. She was his family, his home, his warmth, his comfort, and the mother of his wonderful babies, whom he had held in his arms with awe and love for the first time in his life, pressed against his chest, and felt tears of happiness come to his eyes. Late for work, Jessica saw her husband, who should be home, deciding to follow him. Jessica walked down the city streets, keeping her eyes on the backs of passers-by. For the first time in her life, she, an adult family woman, was following a man, and that person was her husband, Alex. Was Camila right? A colleague from work, who lived not far from this place, said she'd seen Alex a couple of times in a restaurant with a girl. A beautiful blonde, long-legged, stylish couple were discussing something animatedly. Occasionally, the lady stroked Alex's shoulder encouragingly. "You're wrong," Jessica said confidently. "Alex and I have always had a trusting, close relationship. We share our joys and worries with each other, tell each other how the day went." "No, of course, Camila's wrong. She's only seen the man a couple of times in her life. so she's confused him with someone else. Camila was generally skeptical about Jessica's marriage. The woman's acquaintance with Alex had taken place practically in front of her eyes, and she had then confidently declared that the relationship had no prospects. "Oh, mate, if I were you, I wouldn't get enchanted before the time, so as not to be disappointed later," Camila said. "We've been there, we know. Everything hurts afterwards." Jessica realized that there was some truth in her colleague's words. But next to Alex, she felt so loved, so protected. He looked at her with love and tenderness, protected her, tried to please her. It could not be a deception. "It's not the experience," Camila said in response to Jessica's objections. "Right now, he really feels that you are the woman of his life, hormones, confetti, bouqueting period, all that. But as time passes, he'll take a sober look at the situation and realize everything." Jessica realized that maybe her friend was right. After all, Alex was so perfect, so handsome. His turquoise eyes and tanned face, the dimples on his cheeks when he smiled. Jessica was ready to admire his smile endlessly. She had never felt this way about anyone before. Alex, a lead engineer at a major oil company. He supervises almost 100 people. Alex is a smart, driven, grasping man. He had a prestigious university in the capital. He was offered to stay in Washington, but he did not want to leave his hometown. His elderly parents lived here. Alex was a late and only child. He couldn't leave his mom and dad. Having returned, he never once regretted it, in his own words. Alex's parents were wealthy people. His father, in the past a large by the standards of the city entrepreneur, the owner of a dairy plant, which brought large profits. Previously, he was allegedly engaged in the restaurant business in Washington, but after the birth of his son changed the occupation. The family moved from the capital to a quiet provincial town with developed infrastructure and good ecology. "I always thought it was better to raise children in small towns," Kimberly, Alex's mother, said of the move many years ago. Contrary to silly stereotypes, Jessica has an ideal relationship with her in-laws. In a way, they replaced her parents, although they were more like grandparents in age. Jessica vaguely remembered her mom and dad. They died when she was 5 years old, going for mushrooms in the forest, and did not return. The girl was taken in by her grandmother, her mom's mom, who gave her everything she could. Jessica adored her grandmother, but at the age of 20 she was left all alone. Her last relative was gone. She wanted the love and support of a close person by her side. Probably that's why she got in touch with Bernard, who at first seemed to be perfect. When the tragedy occurred, Jessica was in her 3rd year of study at the University of Economics. She got into university thanks to her grandmother. From childhood, she encouraged her granddaughter to study and strive for a better life. Their small family, in Bridget's opinion, was not poor. At least they certainly did not starve. But the grandmother always lamented that she could not take her granddaughter to show her big cities and other countries. The girl did not understand these worries. Bridget was quite satisfied with her life. "I traveled the world thanks to my work," she said. She had been a train conductor all her life and had visited many interesting places. Grandma loved to reminisce about those happy times, and her granddaughter simply adored her stories. "Well, what are your years? Everything will still be," Bridget wondered. "What's so interesting about traveling?" "Yes, Grandma's stories are fascinating, but why be upset that there's no money for traveling now? You can watch all that stuff on TV." Then, when Alex showed Jessica the world, she realized what Grandma meant. It was a pity that she couldn't share her impressions with her family. Alex is the best gift that fate has given Jessica. He literally changed the life and outlook of a woman. Next to her spouse, she always felt peaceful. They have been together for so many years, and nothing has changed all the same tenderness, admiration. Both have become each other quite dear. The household has not bogged them down, as many warned. Alex still looks at his wife with love, still tries to surprise and delight her. The prophecies of acquaintances about the futility of this relationship did not come true, including the predictions of Camila. Or did they? Could this be the moment Jessica recognizes her husband from a different perspective? Why is he out on the street at this hour? Alex should be at home looking after their sick son. What's he doing here? Probably rushing to meet that blonde hottie of his Camila told me about. Now Bridget was going to find out. Her heart pounded, starting to give her a headache. Jessica was used to trusting her husband with everything. And now, following him through the streets of the city, she felt a mixture of the most contradictory feelings: anxiety, excitement, shame, guilt all at once. Jessica didn't understand what her husband Alex was doing in the city center right now, but she knew one thing: he should be at home at this moment looking after little Carl. One of the twins was sick and didn't go to daycare today. Jessica couldn't take a sick day. She was busy at work, with reports and an inspection. But Alex could work remotely from home today, which in fact the man was supposed to do now, to work and look after his son at the same time. But for some reason he is here, hurrying down the wide street somewhere, and Jessica follows him to uncover his secret at last. If it was something work-related, Alex would definitely call me, warn me, and tell me, she pondered. Who did he leave Carl for? The baby is only 3. He can't be home alone yet. Besides, he's had a high fever since this morning. No, Alex is a sensitive and caring father. He adores his children and would never leave any of them in danger. Surely someone is with Carl right now, a nanny or grandmother, Alex's mother. But why doesn't Jessica know about this? And why was Alex suddenly here, in the center of town? His company's office is about 10 kilometers away, and Alex looks kind of weird. The man always goes to work in trousers and a shirt. There is a strict dress code. Now Alex was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Jessica couldn't remember these things in her husband's wardrobe. Either something new, or on the contrary old and therefore long-forgotten clothes. Strange, of course. Alex never liked jeans and t-shirts. He preferred other, not brightly colored things. Right now he was wearing an orange polo. It was even more confusing. Jessica followed her husband's footsteps, noting more and more strange details: tattered trainers of an unknown brand. Strange, her husband Alex favored name brands. Not out of snobbery, no, that was not in the man's character at all. Despite his high earnings and brilliant career, just branded quality things were more comfortable for him. Where did he get those sneakers from? The market. And in general, Alex looked different, a different look. Light stubble on his usually smoothly shaven face and tiredness. But of course it was Alex's push. Jessica would have recognized her husband in any image: the easy gait, the beautiful swarthy skin tone, the bright turquoise eyes that had once turned her head. She still admired them often. Alex kept walking forward, Jessica behind him. Why was he traveling on foot? His husband usually traveled by car. He wasn't particularly fond of walking. Jessica was already late for work. She'd left the office at lunchtime to get something to eat. Suddenly noticed her husband and, of course, hurried after him. It's no big deal, she thought. I've warned Camila. I'll think of something to say to my superiors. It's not the first time friends help each other out. Camila will cover. There's nothing to worry about. Finally, Alex turned into one of the restaurants, which were plentiful on both sides of the main street. Jessica froze. In her head again and again Camila's words that she had seen her husband in a cafe with a beautiful blonde. A friend, a colleague, had told her about it just the other day. Jessica then was sure that Camila was mistaken. After all, she at one time until the last did not believe that Jessica with Alex everything will work out. Her friend had repeatedly said that out loud. Camila's own experience showed that it was simply impossible. Alex was handsome, promising, wealthy, young and free. And she, Jessica, too, of course, beautiful. You can't argue with that. But she's still a different kind of bird. Jessica lives in a cramped one-room flat inherited from her grandmother. She works in a small firm as an economist for a pittance. And most importantly, she's raising her daughter alone. Who needs someone else's child? Does the prince need a woman with a burden? Camila questioned. So go for a walk. Meat will do. I wouldn't count on a serious relationship if I were you. Her colleague's words sounded quite logical and convincing. Indeed, why would Alex want someone else's child? And his parents would probably be against it. Jessica hadn't met her parents-in-law yet and couldn't imagine how happy they would be for Jessica and her daughter Lillian. Still, meeting Bernard had a positive side. He'd given her a beautiful, healthy daughter. And then he was gone. Just vanished from Jessica's life. The commitment of family life was weighing on him. The bloke wasn't ready. Well, it's hard to blame him for that. It was Jessica's decision to keep the baby, and it wasn't an easy decision to make. Jessica still shuddered at the desperate situation she found herself in almost 13 years ago. She was just a few steps away from making the biggest mistake of her life. The logical and easier thing for her to do at that time was to have an abortion. It's a blessing that a very young Jessica didn't. Lillian is now 12 years old. Tall, slim, big-eyed. She looked like Bernard, but no one was upset about it. Bernard was a real beauty, dark skin, almond-shaped eyes, shiny black hair. He had a touch of Oriental blood in him, high cheekbones, well-defined lips. All this was passed on to Lillian. She was already a teenager, a young girl. When Jessica went out with her daughter, she often caught glances from boys and even older boys. Just a little more, and her daughter would blossom into a beautiful girl. The thought that she might not be there at all sometimes sent shivers down Jessica's spine. When her grandmother died, Jessica was left all alone. Jessica had been an adult for a long time, 20 years old, after all, but in fact the girl felt almost a child. Her grandmother always took care of her, cooked delicious dishes for her granddaughter, calmed her down, even woke them up in the mornings at the university. She surrounded Jessica with care and love, like a warm, cozy blanket. And now the girl was unbearably cold, homesick, and scared. Jessica missed her grandmother desperately. She cried a lot during that difficult period. In public, of course, kept to herself, but at home she gave vent to her feelings, sobbing, wailing, pouring out her grief. The realization that she was all alone frightened, and even panicked her. How can you live in the world if no one wants you or cares about you? Jessica needed a shoulder to lean on, a friend, a loved one. And that's when she met Bernard. The dark-haired, good-looking guy worked part-time as a janitor on her property. Always cheerful and smiling, energetic and agile, a total positive. Jessica noticed, of course, that the young janitor looked back at her when she came home from the steam. But guys like that, they probably don't miss a skirt at all. After a while, Bernard began to greet Jessica and smile broadly at her. The girl could not remain sad, and sad at such moments Bernard smiled too infectiously. No one could resist. Somewhat imperceptibly, the girl developed a liking for this guy. Their relationship had grown to the point where they sometimes talked about things around the house. Now, Jessica knew that Bernard came here from the village. His family was there. He served in the army, went to college, but he didn't have enough money. His parents were poor, to put it mildly. So he works part-time. Bernard also knew a lot about Jessica, for example, that she lived all alone and studied at a prestigious university in economics. One day, Bernard asked Jessica out on a date. The girl was taken aback by such an offer. Bernard was clearly very embarrassed, blushing, stammering, looking under his feet. It was not at all like the conversation of a cheerful young man, and so it looked especially sweet and touching. Of course, Jessica agreed. Bernard had no money, so the young people went to the seafront. They walked, talked, held hands, then kissed. Jessica felt more and more attracted to Bernard. He was so nice, so interesting. He'd just turned 22, but he'd seen and learnt more in his years than Jessica had ever dreamed of. Her life was relatively calm and prosperous, while Bernard had to work from the age of 11 to help his family, go through the army, get into serious trouble and get out of it. Bernard's life was a constant adventure. At home at the entrance, the girl suddenly realized that she did not want to part with him at all, but she didn't dare to invite him back to her place. Then she didn't dare. Later, Bernard did move in with her, and Jessica was happy with him for a long time, almost 2 years. Bernard masterfully fried potatoes and eggs, cleaned the flat in a flash. All this guy did much better than Jessica, whom her grandmother raised like a princess, protecting and pitying. He also knew how to fix taps and repair furniture. Life had taught him all that. Most of Jessica's time was taken up with her studies. Bernard was not particularly in need of science. He was listed in the construction school, but almost never appeared there, preferring to earn money. But that wasn't so good either. Casual earnings, part-time janitor's salary, and Jessica's social scholarship, that's all the components of the budget. I had to cut back on everything. It was a little frustrating for the guy, as he wanted a beautiful life. But Jessica was happy, as it was the main thing, was that there was a loving person around. Bernard was so sensitive, so understanding. He always knew when Jessica needed support and provided it. The guy was never stingy with words and generously bestowed the girl with compliments that made her melt. Bernard often went out with his friends without Jessica, and she didn't seem to mind. She had no time to go out anyway, because she had a lot of projects to do at school. Sometimes, though, Jessica was jealous when she saw Bernard going out with his friends. What if there are other girls there? Bernard is so handsome, so outgoing. Who could resist him? But the guy assured that he does not notice anyone but Jessica, and he does not need anyone at all. He's happy as he is. It's just friends, guys, sit around talk. It's like a holiday for us guys, you know. Jessica nodded, but still stayed home with a restless heart. Her intuition told her that not everything was as smooth as Bernard said. But the girl consciously silenced that weak inner voice. 2 years flew by like a day. Jessica was already in her final year. Bernard was also finishing his technical school. Soon they would both be professionals, they would be able to get jobs, and then, finally, there would be no need to save money on the essentials. Maybe they could even go to the seaside. That would be marvelous. One February morning, Jessica realized she was expecting a baby. Of course, she and Bernard hadn't planned any children yet. Why should they? They were still on their own 2 feet, barely scraping by. But an unplanned pregnancy isn't an isolated incident. It happens all the time. Jessica's not the first, and she won't be the last. People manage somehow. And yet the girl was scared. She even had sweat on her back as she looked at the 2-stripe test she'd taken to know for sure. How will Bernard react? He'll probably freak out at first too. But he's such an all-rounder, such an experienced bloke, he certainly won't be confused. He'll say it'll be all right. We'll support, as always. We'll smile his trademark smile, and Jessica will immediately feel calm. Except Bernard's reaction was quite different. A baby? The guy even staggered away from Jessica upon hearing the news. What baby? Are you sure? I'm sure 2 tests came back positive. Jessica nodded. Of course, she understood everything perfectly well. But what could she do if this little man was already living under her heart? The girl felt disappointment and resentment. It seemed to her that Bernard's reaction would be quite different. You have to get money to live on somewhere, the boy said, as if he were talking to himself. Should I borrow it from Andrew? Jessica was startled when she heard the dreaded word. What are you talking about? The girl instinctively grabbed her still completely flat stomach as if to protect it. This was something she had never even thought about. Jesse Bernard pulled himself together and spoke in a gentle but firm voice. You realize we're in no position to be parents right now. What can we give to this baby? What are we doing on our own? We're almost done with our degrees. I could go to work on a construction site. You'll get maternity pay. We'll be fine. Jessica thought it was Bernard who was going to comfort her and say those words. But as it happened, she had to take the initiative. The news of the baby had knocked Bernard out of his depth. Of course, he would be ashamed of his cowardice later, but Jessica never reproached him for those phrases, though it was certainly very hurtful to hear. Bernard had convinced Jessica over and over again that they could not keep the baby. He painted depressing pictures of the future. He said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. And at some point, the girl gave in to his persuasion. He's right about everything. They have no money, they haven't even got a job yet. They're cramped in a small 1-bedroom, and there's a baby. The baby needs a lot of money, nappies, medication, clothes, which babies grow out of at breakneck speed. Jessica will not be able to work for a long time, when the child grows up and goes to kindergarten. No one will want such a specialist without experience. Jessica went to the hospital with a heavy heart. In her bag, she had all the necessary things she had been told to take with her: slippers, dressing gown, nappies. Jessica would have to spend the whole day in the hospital. She would not be allowed to go home until the evening, and that was if everything was all right. There was a queue at the emergency room. Jessica sat on a couch in the corner and stared at people for nothing. She was trembling, and she could hardly contain herself. She wished Bernard were there to hold her hand, to stroke her back, to assure her that everything would be all right. But he was off on another part-time job. And rightly so, they need the money. Especially since this month they had to pay a large sum for this very procedure. Next to Jessica sat a woman in her 40s, well-groomed, beautiful, expensively and tastefully dressed. Exquisite manicure, fashionable haircut. Jessica thought she'd like to look like that in 20 years. Except this woman's eyes were very sad. A man approached the woman, probably her husband. You could tell they were a wealthy couple. I've done the paperwork. You'll be called soon. He put his hand on his companion's shoulder. Everything will be fine. For some reason, Jessica immediately thought that this woman also wanted to get rid of an unwanted pregnancy. Her spouse spoke the same words as Bernard. "It's going to be okay. Calm down, really. Why would they, people their age, need a baby? An accidental pregnancy, I suppose. What could be good?" Jessica's neighbor looked up at her husband. What could be good about this whole situation? 11 IVF protocols, 5 frozen pregnancies. Again, those painful procedures, treatment, recovery, and then on again. You could see that the woman was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. In her companion's eyes, there was so much pain, so much sympathy. He did not know how to help his wife and what to say to her words. So he just hugged her. "How stupid I was," almost whispered the woman. "I was afraid then that I could not cope. I was just finishing school, ahead of the university career. My son would be 24 years old now. I knew it was a boy. I felt it right away. And now I'm paying for that mistake all my life. Serves me right. I'm right not to have any more children. It's a punishment." The man continued to comfort his wife in silence, stroking her back, her hair, squeezing her palms in his hands. He couldn't seem to find the right words. Jessica looked at the adult couple, eyes wide. She understood everything from their brief dialogue. Long ago, when she was a high school student, this woman had an abortion, and now, because of its consequences, she could not have children. She is tormented, worried, spends a lot of money, a lot of time to realize her dream of motherhood. But it doesn't work. Jessica suddenly realizes that she will never get rid of her baby boy. She already loves it, even though it's still just a cluster of cells. That's what Bernard called their baby when he insisted on terminating the pregnancy. Jessica is all grown up now. She's almost finished university, just a little bit away from graduating, with her degree in her pocket and Bernard by her side. Jessica's not alone. Together they'll make it. The girl ran out of the clinic as if chased by a pack of dogs. People looked at her in surprise. Once outside, Jessica breathed a sigh of relief. She felt as if she had just escaped a major disaster. Jessica put her hand on her stomach and smiled. Her baby was with her, and that girl. In that moment, Jessica clearly realized that what she had under her heart was not just a cluster of cells, but her daughter loved, beautiful, healthy. They would meet in 7 months. Bernard appeared unfazed by Jessica's story. "But it's not serious at all," he said. "I'll take you to the clinic tomorrow. You shouldn't have gone." It was the first time they had fought. Jessica insisted. Bernard argued that she was wrong. His arguments had seemed so logical and right before. Now Jessica wondered how she had ever agreed with them. "Yes, it will be hard for a while," she said. "But we're both very mature. We can handle it. I can't take that step." Finally, Bernard slammed the door and walked straight out into the dark March evening. Jessica thought he'd cool down, come back to apologize. After all, Bernard had always understood her so well before. The same would happen now. But Bernard didn't turn up until the morning. Drunk, aggressive, he again insisted that the child must be disposed of. "I have the right to decide this too, and it concerns me." It was now impossible to change Jessica's mind, and the boy quickly realized this. He was a good judge of people in general. They hardly spoke to each other during this period. Jessica asked the guy some questions, but he didn't dignify her with answers. He only came home for the night, and not always. Jessica hoped that time would pass and the man she loved would get used to the idea that he would soon become a father. Everything would be all right. They had such a warm and close relationship. Of course, they'll reconcile sooner or later. Bernard will realize everything. He'll be ashamed. But one day, coming home from university, Jessica found that Bernard's things were gone, as well as Bernard himself. Jessica realized at once. She had hoped in vain that the boy would support her. She'd been wrong to think that he just needed time to get used to the situation. Bernard wasn't going to take responsibility for the baby. And he wasn't likely to love her, Jessica, that much. Not at the time. Much later, the girl suddenly realized that Bernard was using her, living in her flat. Renting in their town wasn't cheap. Bernard's earnings were clearly not enough for such an expensive pleasure. Besides, Jessica took care of him, cooked for him, washed and ironed his clothes, cleaned. Bernard lived on his own. At first, he amazed Jessica with his culinary talents and housekeeping, but then constant fatigue from supposedly hard work, things at the technical school and outings with friends. Somehow Jessica took the whole household on her shoulders. She was happy that she was doing something for the person she loved. And yet Jessica tried to find him. How could it be? Gone. Vanished. Didn't even say goodbye. That's not right. Anyway, the baby I'm carrying under my heart, his baby, who needs a father. But it turned out that Bernard had been expelled from the technical school almost 2.5 years ago. That's the news the girl gasped. So under the pretext of studying, Bernard was spending time somewhere unknown. Wow, what a masterful deceiver he is. He told me so convincingly that he was going to his classes, while he himself. A bloke from the technical school, when he heard Jessica was going to find out about Bernard, came to her. "Are you looking for Bernard?" he asked. Jessica nodded. "Well, that's what I thought. It's a rare name. I don't think we've had many Bernards go to school here. Tell me what happened." He was head over heels in love. Then he borrowed a good sum of money and ran away. No, the shocked girl shook her head. He just disappeared. We lived together for almost 2 years. Everything was fine. "Lived in your flat. Probably at your expense," the guy chuckled. Jessica suddenly realized that the guy was right. Bernard earned, of course, from time to time, but he spent his money mostly on himself. Stylish clothes, gadgets, Jessica was bought occasionally inexpensive flowers or fruit baskets. The girl was so happy with this attention and so happy to have her favorite person around her that she just didn't notice the obvious. "The fellow's right," she murmured thoughtfully. "Indeed, Bernard has been living off me. If you look at the situation soberly." "Something like that, but not quite," Jessica countered. "Really, not quite. Bernard sometimes cooked nice dinners, fixed things around the house, always wondered how you were doing. If you put it that way, he gave something too, not just took." "Not exactly," the boy murmured thoughtfully. "Well, anyway, be glad he's out of your life. He's an opportunist. A clinging fish. A beggar from the village, unwilling to study and work, but dreaming of a beautiful life." From the outside, it was clearly visible how he tried to make friends with guys from wealthy families and daughters of wealthy parents in order to pull resources from them. At first, he still succeeded, but then everyone in the technical school realized who he was, and his tricks did not pass here anymore. But there are plenty of majors outside the college, so Bernard went hunting elsewhere. He was expelled from here for failing in his studies. Jessica flapped her eyes, trying to digest what she'd heard. "But I'm not the daughter of rich parents," she said. "Quite the opposite. I have a flat, a steady source of income." Jessica thought and nodded. "Well, I'm sorry, but it's written all over your face that you're naive and inexperienced. It's easy to fool a girl like that. Bernard didn't have a place to live. That's why he picked on you. He's been living in a safe haven for a while, never mind not being able to pay the rent. I'm sure all this time he was still on the hunt." Jessica thought for a moment. Yes, indeed, Bernard was often disappearing with some friends of his that the girl knew nothing at all about. Perhaps the bloke was right, and now he'd probably found someone more suitable. So he's gone and left her. You should be glad that Sponger's gone. And if he ever shows up after another failure, chase him away. Don't even let him on your doorstep. That's my advice to you," said the boy. Jessica didn't believe the guy, because it was very hard to realize that the person you were so in love with wasn't who he said he was. Overcoming her natural shyness, Jessica interviewed a few more people. She chose the older ones, seniors, almost graduates, and yes, some of them remembered Bernard. They spoke of the young man in much the same way the first guy had. Jessica returned home feeling upset, as if the ground had been knocked out from under her feet. Jessica had had a different picture in her head for 2 years, beautiful, bright, right? But it turns out Bernard was using her. When he found out Jessica was pregnant, the cunning chap realized what this was all about. Liability, child support, a screaming baby, and a tiny one-bedroom, problems for life. Or at least for the first 18 years after the baby is born. Too expensive a price to pay for free housing and not so luxurious munchies. So he ran away. He's probably out of town too. No one's keeping Bernard here. Then Jessica thought about the baby, how she'd raise it. Would she be able to handle it? Would she be able to pull it off? She couldn't know that. But she realized one thing: even though her situation was desperate, this child would still be born to Jessica. There wasn't a soulmate in the world. And here was a daughter. Jessica felt she was going to have a girl. Together they would cope with all the troubles of life. And then there was a difficult, very difficult period. Diploma, the last responsible session, state exams. Jessica studied like a curse from morning till night. Jessica didn't think about Bernard anymore. She just didn't have time. And then the toxicosis hit. Jessica was nauseous and nauseous. She felt dizzy all the time. But no one had canceled her exams, and no one was going to make any favors for a pregnant student. Jessica knew one thing: she had to get that diploma. She couldn't leave everything at the finish line, even though it was very hard to study in such a state. Jessica was happy about one thing: in the antenatal clinic, where Jessica registered for pregnancy. She was told at every appointment that everything was going according to plan. The baby was healthy. It was developing as it should. These words of doctors encouraged the girl and warmed her soul. A few months flew by unnoticeably. The diploma is over. The state exams have been passed with honors. Jessica is happy and proud of herself. She's done it. But what's next? The pregnancy was well past the first half. The belly was still barely visible, just a slight hint. But no one around her had any idea that Jessica was expecting a baby. After defending her diploma, the dean unexpectedly invited the successful student to his office. Jessica was a little surprised by this, went up to the first floor and knocked gently on the door of the dean's office. "Come in," she heard. Jessica saw Jeffrey behind the desk, always stern and serious. He was smiling broadly now, a cheerful sparkle in his eyes. "You're a great student," he began the conversation. "Your grades have been good all year, and you did well on your final exams. That's why I recommended you to the plant recruiters. They're in need of bright young economists. You know how much they pay." Of course, Jessica knew. She never dreamed of ever getting a job there. Those who worked at the factory lived in huge new flats and houses and drove expensive cars. In their town, the phrase factory worker even became a household name. It denoted wealthy people who could deny themselves nothing. Jessica was even a little dizzy from these upcoming prospects. But then a new life stirred in the girl's belly, bringing her mother back to earth. Who needs an employee with no experience, who in a couple of months will go on maternity leave? It's not hard to hide a pregnancy now. You can hardly see your stomach, so it's not a problem. But you'd still have to come clean and face a lot of accusations and let people down. Jessica wasn't capable of that. When she realized that the job was slipping through her fingers, she almost cried. This job could solve all her problems at once. Jessica really wanted to work, to plunge into practice. That was fate. "Jeffrey, there's something I have to tell you about this offer." Jessica still had a faint hope that everything would work out. The dean was going to say that pregnancy was no big deal. You'll work for a couple of months, go on maternity leave, and then return to the factory. Such a promising economist will wait. But the man, having heard the graduate's confession, exclaimed, puzzled. "But how so? Is it a long term or what? Just such offers happen once in a lifetime. It's a shame to miss the chance. Jessica, you're a good economist, you'll make a great specialist, and I can see you need the money. I know your story. That's why I decided to help." Jessica shook her head negatively. She understood everything the dean was saying, but there was nothing she could do about it. And she would never get rid of the baby, even if she hadn't missed the deadline yet. The girl walked home and sobbed to her heart's content, ignoring the passers-by looking back at her. It was better that the offer had never happened. Such prospects, a completely different life. It was hard to turn down a place like this. But Jessica didn't want to cheat, and she couldn't let people down. It wasn't in her nature. Besides, Jeffrey said that she wouldn't have been able to do it, because when hiring employees of the plant undergo a medical examination. So as it happened, it happened. At home, Jessica calmed down, pulled herself together. She's having a baby. She needs to be strong. In addition, before the birth of a daughter, it is necessary to solve a lot of issues. The first financial difficulties were not far off. Now Jessica will not receive a scholarship. She will not be taken to work, either, a girl who is about to go on maternity leave. but it's a job in her specialty. And there are other jobs. They do not require high qualifications and sometimes even official registration. They don't pay much. But Jessica needs something to live on. Not only just to live, she will have to save some amount of money not to work during the period when her daughter will be a baby. Yes, the state provides some allowances for children, but Jessica has already learnt that they are paltry sums. You can't live on that. So Jessica, an excellent student, went to work as a cleaner of entrances in the same homeowners association in which Bernard had once worked as a janitor. The girl cleaned the stairwells in the early morning and late evening, when there were not so many people. The pay was good. By Jessica's standards, she had enough to live on and managed to save a little. Of course, she didn't get rich, but after her grandmother was gone, she was used to saving money, so she didn't worry, especially about that. Physical labor suddenly turned out to be the best sedative. Heavy and sad thoughts were somehow washed out of her head. Jessica even felt joy when, instead of a busy staircase, she saw a shining clean platform in front of her eyes. There was something soothing, even peaceful about it. At the same time, the girl was looking for earnings on the internet. She realized that she would not be able to wield a rag for long. The belly was growing by the day, and by the hour, it was simply impossible to hide it. And of course, it prevented her from bending over and stretching properly. And it was dangerous to carry buckets of water, just in case. And Jessica found another way to earn money, even more successful than the last one. And most importantly, a small child was not a hindrance. It turned out that hundreds of thousands of students across the country do not want to write their own term papers and essays. Downloading ready-made papers is not an option. Teachers have long known them by heart. Yes, an online verification greatly complicates the situation. So there was a demand for people who can write such works for money. And Jessica could do it, and she could do it. She even breathed a sigh of relief when she realized that her university knowledge would help her in such a difficult situation. Jessica quit her job at the homeowners association because she couldn't clean the entrances anymore, and delved into a new job that she really liked. The girl was afraid that during her maternity leave her knowledge would be forgotten, outdated, erased. But now she would be aware of everything that was happening in the economy. Jessica worked and felt how she was pumping her professionalism. This, of course, could not help but please. The girl managed to save enough money to prepare everything necessary for her baby girl nappies. Nappies for the first time, bottles, overalls, raspipens, bathtub. It turned out that the little man needs so much. Jessica even bought a pram. Not a new one, of course, new ones were very expensive. She took a hand on the announcement of a wonderful transport for the princess's soft pink pram with beautiful flowers on the side. In excellent, by the way, in excellent condition. In due time, little Lillian was born. When the baby was placed on Jessica's chest in the delivery room, the young mum even cried from the accumulated emotions. Now she is not alone. Now she is a mum. It is, of course, very difficult and responsible. But what a joy. The days in the maternity hospital with her little daughter turned out to be an incredibly happy time. Jessica didn't have to work, didn't have to clean or cook. She was invited to the canteen 5 times a day and was provided with clean nappies for her daughter every day. Beauty. Sometimes the girl looked out of the window at the festive discharges arranged for new mums by relatives, balloons, laughter, songs, fun, crowds of relatives and friends, all of them joyfully welcomed the new member of the family, showered mum with flowers. Jessica smiled as she watched these scenes of solemn discharges. But she was sad too, of course. No one was expecting her like this. Lillian was the only one who was excited about Lillian's arrival. But suddenly Jessica was wrong. When the girl with a tight bundle in her arms went to the porch of the maternity hospital, a small crowd was waiting for her. There were a couple of classmates, a few colleagues from the homeowners association. They were all smiling. There were flowers and balloons too. Jessica almost cried with excitement. The girl was put into a taxi and sent home. Her friends accompanied her to the flat. Someone had to carry balloons, flowers, and packages with gifts for the baby. So Jessica had a solemn discharge. And then began the everyday life of a young mother. Jessica got used to her new role not as easily as she had planned before giving birth. Sleepless nights, inexperience, unpredictable behavior of her daughter, and fears. With the arrival of the baby, Jessica had new fears that she could not even think of before. What if Lillian chokes while feeding? What if the rash on the baby's body is a symptom of a terrible disease? Why is her daughter crying so much? Maybe she needs medical attention. Jessica also had to work because her child support was so low. There were times when the young mom had to cradle her daughter with one hand and write another term paper with the other, because the deadline was looming. Jessica slept very little during this difficult period. There was absolutely nowhere to wait for help. That's why she had to deal with the child herself, and work, and keep the house clean. After all, it was still necessary to go to the clinic and walk with the baby every day. Jessica lost a lot of weight. She had deep shadows under her eyes at that time. She sometimes didn't even have time to clean herself up for the day. In the morning, she would twist her long, disheveled hair into a bun at the back of her head, hoping to make it up later. But she remembered to do it after midnight. And yet, despite all these difficulties, Jessica never once regretted her decision to keep the baby. Jessica, on the contrary, looking at her daughter Lillian, sometimes horrified at what she could do. After all, she had already come to the clinic, she had already taken the cue, she had already decided on a terrible deed. She wondered what would have happened if she hadn't heard that woman's conversation with her husband. She never had such thoughts again. Now she didn't even want to think about it. Lillian grew up a calm, trouble-free child. She had everything on time. Her teeth grew in when she needed them, and she sat up as planned. And she started school early. Jessica had no one to have a word with at home. She missed human contact, so she was always talking to her daughter. Perhaps it was because of this that Lillian spoke at an age when other children don't even try to say their first words yet. The mums on the playground, looking at the sensible, pretty little girl, were amazed. And Jessica's heart was overflowing with joy and maternal pride. She has a wonderful daughter, the best happiness that she has. At the age of 2, Lillian went to kindergarten. By the way, the girl quickly got used to the new place without tears and tantrums, as if she understood that there was no other way out and did not create unnecessary problems for her mother. Lillian was not even sick during the adaptation period, like other children. Having realized that her daughter was adjusted, Jessica started looking for a job in her specialty. Earnings on the internet, this of course is good, but still the money is small and unstable. The young mother had to save on everything, and so wanted to buy toys and beautiful dresses for her daughter, and sometimes pamper herself. It was not for nothing that Jessica studied for 5 years. It was time to look for a job in her specialty, no more red diploma on the shelf to dust. Of course, Jessica faced difficulties. An employee with no experience, and even with a small child in her arms, did not want to take. Now endless sick days will begin. We know you, young mums, but Jessica Perry, my daughter, attends the garden for a long time and does not get sick. There's no problem with that. Jessica heard the same thing in every interview. You all say that, but you're not the right person for us. We need someone with experience. You can't do it. Jessica went to interviews like she was going to work and was met with the same rejections everywhere. It baffled her. Where am I supposed to get experience if they won't hire me without it? She once asked a recruiter bluntly. The woman was confused for the first few seconds. That's not my problem. And yet one day luck smiled on the girl. The furniture repair company urgently needed an economist. Salary offered low, so the queue of applicants for this position was not lined up, and the person was needed right now. So Jessica was hired, despite her lack of experience and the presence of a small child. It was not up to such subtleties. Jessica quickly proved herself. She did her work diligently, had time for everything, and also gave her ideas on how to improve accounting. The girl finally got to work in her specialty. The management, of course, quickly appreciated her zeal. The young employee was respected and her salary was even raised. We need such enthusiasts, the boss often said. These praises gave Jessica a pleasant warmth in her soul. A bonus to her favorite job and a good salary was communication with a team of adults. How much the girl missed it all. For 2 years, she talked only with her little daughter Lillian. And hear jokes, joint tea parties, exchange of news and opinions. Jessica missed it all. In the same firm, she met Camilla. They were almost the same age and therefore became fast friends. Camilla often came to visit Jessica and invited her to stay with her. The girl was still living with her parents, so they had a lot of common topics for conversation. True, the opinions of friends on some issues differed, because of which sometimes there were heated arguments. But it was also very interesting and exciting. Life had settled down. Jessica was working, getting good money. Now she didn't have to skimp on food and clothes. Jessica even managed to save up for a summer trip to the sea with Lillian. Luckily for the young mother, Camila volunteered to go with them. It was a wonderful holiday, which was repeated several times afterwards. Lillian was a joy to behold. She grew up a beautiful girl, very similar to Bernard, but the character and learning abilities of the girl went to her mother. Lillian quickly and effortlessly learned to read, write, and count before school. In kindergarten, she always went with a book. She also drew beautifully. Jessica couldn't get enough of her treasure. But Camila's personal life was not going well at all. She often went on dates, had easy romances, and then shared with her friend over a glass of wine another disappointment. Maybe I don't need them, these men? Maybe they are all really arseholes. Yours left you with the baby and ran away. I don't know what to say. Jessica shook her head. You know I don't have much experience with these things. Maybe you're right. But Jessica didn't really think so. She knew there were many wonderful men in the world, kind, brave, caring. She just didn't want to argue with Camila, who was already upset. Of course, Jessica sometimes thought about the fact that she needed her own man, a reliable support, a wall behind which you can hide from the hardships of life, because pulling everything alone is very hard. There is no one to share her worries with. She herself would be happy to take care of this man, would surround him with love and care. And Lillian would have a father who would walk with her on the street and carry the girl on his shoulders. Risks were in short supply. Jessica, after all, saw with what eyes her daughter saw of the father-little-daughter couples. She didn't say anything out loud. She didn't want to upset her mom. But Jessica had noticed it all herself. But where to find him, such a prince? And when homework, daughter. Jessica didn't go out much. Sometimes, of course, Camila took her out to a bar or a cafe. Lillian was old enough to spend a few hours alone. But still, the woman's heart wasn't in the right place during that time. She kept thinking about how her baby was doing. She couldn't relax. Why are you spinning like a frying pan? Camila was angry. Look at the cool guys at the next table looking at us. They're about to meet us. You know, I should probably get going, Jessica replied. You always do. Camila shook her head resentfully. Just when something interesting starts, you run right away. Camila could not fully understand her friend. She herself had not had children yet. She had no idea what it was like to worry about her child. And she didn't know about the worries associated with a child either. By the way, Camila is still single. She has occasional stormy romances, but they all end the same way. The woman is again disappointed in the next beau. Or he himself, without explanation, disappears over the horizon. When Alex appeared in Jessica's life, she initially did not even want to talk about it to her friend. She had just gone through a difficult breakup and was in upset feelings. And here was Jessica and her happiness. And the perceptive Camila figured it all out. Are you seeing someone? Well, sort of. How did you know? Your eyes gave you away. Camila grinned. Come on, spit it out already. Who is he? How did you meet him? Jessica had to tell her friend then. She didn't mind, though. She wanted to share the story with her friend. Especially since the story really did seem like a fairy tale. Jessica always came home at the same time. She would drive from work to school and pick up Lillian from after-school care. Together they would go shopping and then slowly, unhurriedly walk back to their house. Mother and daughter shared the news of the day, discussed plans for the evening. It was a wonderful time. That May evening. At first it was business as usual. Lillian was in a happy frame of mind. A long holiday, a school camp, and a present from her mother for the excellent completion of the first grade. The girl walked beside Jessica, and Jessica smiled, bouncing with the feelings that overwhelmed her. She didn't think to pull her daughter back. Let her have her own fun. And then a man approached them, handsome, young. Expensive brand-name clothes gave away his social status. He was looking straight at Jessica and approaching her. There could be no doubt. Hello, a little embarrassed, said the young man. You just don't freak out. I just have no idea how to start a conversation. We need to talk. At least I certainly do. Jessica looked dumbfounded. Lillian looked at the stranger curiously, but without fear. The woman thought she was setting a bad example for her daughter. She had taught her so many times not to talk to strangers, and here she was. But on the other hand, there was nothing to be afraid of. A busy street, crowds of people going about their business. They're certainly not in any danger here. And this stranger evokes feelings other than fear or dislike. He's clearly embarrassed, though usually he's probably confident and self-sufficient. This behavior looks nice enough, and in general an open look, a beautiful smile, a calm voice. Jessica suddenly realized that all this attracted her to the stranger. This is a man you want to listen to. Shall we go to a cafe? The man suggested. I think the girl could use some ice cream. I wouldn't say no. Lillian smiled at him. No, that's unnecessary. Jessica shook her head, realizing the man didn't know how to speak in front of a child. The woman sent Lillian away to the nearest playground. Jessica could see exactly what her daughter was doing. The girl was also glancing at her mother, but she couldn't hear her conversation with the stranger now. So what did you want to talk about? Jessica asked. The young man introduced himself as Alex and then told her what the matter was. As he narrated, Jessica was surprised, delighted, and tried to hide a happy smile. She felt like the heroine of a romantic comedy. It turns out that Alex dines in this cafe every night after work, and the walls there are transparent, made of thick tempered glass. The man, understandably enough, is looking at the street during dinner. His field of vision includes people hurrying about their business in the evening. Then one day he sees Jessica and her daughter. The easy gait, the kind look in your eyes. You looked at your daughter with such tenderness and looked, well, like Madonna and Child from ancient paintings. I don't know how to explain. Alex was embarrassed and confused. But Jessica certainly understood what the man was trying to say. Don't think anything of the sort, it's just, I understand you're single now, and we could try to meet up sometime. Go for a walk somewhere to socialize. I'm raising my daughter alone. That's true. But how did you figure that out? Just surmised. Alex smiled broadly. It was obvious that Jessica's admission that she was single pleased him greatly. No ring on my finger. Besides, I've never once seen you with anyone. Just you and your daughter. I've been watching you for a while now, haven't I? That sounds frightening, Jessica assured the man. Her heart fluttered with joy. Goosebumps were running up and down her back in droves. The woman tried very hard not to show her feelings and hoped she was succeeding. Do you live here? Lillian and I pass by at this time every day. No wonder you see us all the time. Alex smiled again. Yes, you're right. That's exactly how it worked out. When I see you, I feel so happy, so warm at heart. Well, now I said it out loud. That's why I decided to talk to you. I think you're a wonderful person. Not many people like you. And of course, you're very beautiful. Jessica couldn't help smiling. It had been so long since she had been complimented. It had been so long since she had felt delightful and loved. To see the interest in this man's eyes, to feel his sympathy, it was incredibly satisfying. Then the conversation flowed more easily, more naturally. Unnoticeably, Jessica and Alex switched to you. The man was no longer embarrassed or lost. He told a little about himself, asked Jessica a few questions about her life. The rapprochement happened naturally and easily. A little later, Lillian, who was playing on the court, joined them on the bench. She further lightened the mood with her childlike directness. Somehow it happened that Lillian and Alex immediately found a common language. And then there were meetings, dates, sometimes with Lillian, sometimes without her. Jessica was afraid to believe that she had finally met her man. Alex understood her, accepted and respected her opinion, and was always ready to offer help. Jessica felt that if she approached him with a problem, he would immediately solve it, and even happier that he could help. There were doubts, of course. The story of Bernard was still fresh in her mind, though it had been many years since then. Alex is younger. He has a high position in a big company. His parents are very wealthy, after all. Do they need a daughter-in-law like that? And Alex himself? The man is rich, handsome, virtually flawless. He must have a lot of admirers around him. and the man wasn't exactly hiding it. Of course, I've met many women, but you're different from all of them. You're the best. Sincere and honest, a little naive and gentle. There's probably no one like you anymore. I was lucky enough to meet you by chance. Jessica melted at those words. She already loved Alex with all her heart and felt that he had equally strong feelings for her. But Jessica still couldn't believe that a long and serious relationship between them was possible. People around them were adding fuel to the fire. Camila, the master of disappointing men, was especially trying. Those rich guys, they're always looking for the young and beautiful. I've had stories like that. Travis, for example, you remember him, probably a businessman with a cool car, singing "I love you, I can't" in his ears. And then he dumped her. Married his father's partner's daughter. The usual story. You also there especially do not hope, because then it hurts, prophesied Camila. But things didn't turn out the way she predicted. Alex proposed to Jessica. He looked into her eyes with such anxiety when she was confused by the surprise, wondering what to say. Alex had thought at the time that Jessica was formulating a polite refusal. He had admitted it to her himself later. But the woman just didn't know what to do, because she was confused and because she had it firmly planted in her head that they were not a couple. "I love you very much, you know," Jessica finally uttered. "But won't you regret it later? After all, we're far from being equals. And I have a daughter, you know." "You really think so?" Alex marveled. Then he pulled Jessica tightly against him. "I love you. I don't need anyone else. I'm happy I noticed you once. It's the greatest gift of fate." Jessica developed then from the joy and surprise of the touching situation. It felt good to feel so valued and loved. "Well, what about your parents? They won't mind, will they?" Only now Alex realized his omission, smiling. "I should have introduced you to them a long time ago. Then such questions wouldn't have arisen in principle." Alex's parents turned out to be incredibly nice and smiling people. They welcomed Jessica and Lillian so warmly that the woman had no doubts. Alex is not lying. He really wants to be her spouse. Everything will be fine with them. "Children are a great blessing," smiled Kimberly, Alex's mum, looking fondly at Lillian. "She's such a beauty. You have a very good girl." And Lillian reciprocated Alex's parents' affection. If Jessica at first was shy in the company of her mother-in-law, her 7-year-old daughter immediately found a common language with them. She needed her grandparents so much. And Kimberly and Jonathan had long dreamed of grandchildren. And then there was the wedding. Not a lavish gala with lots of guests, but a small family celebration. It was what both the bride and groom wanted. After the wedding, the newly married family Jessica, Alex and Lillian flew to the warm sea. It was a wonderful joint holiday full of sun, fun, pleasant surprises. And then family life began in Alex's large flat. Life somehow quickly settled down. Everything fell into place. After only a couple of months, Jessica felt like it had always been like that. 2 years after the wedding, the family was enriched with 2 new members. Jessica gave birth to twins. Carl and Michael were so funny, so cute. They quickly became everyone's favorite. Kimberly, Jessica's mother-in-law, loved fussing with the babies. The happy grandmother came to the flat of the young family almost every day at first to help her daughter-in-law. After all, 2 babies at once, this is no joke. Often she was accompanied by her husband, Jonathan. He also loved the children and always invented some fun games. When Grandpa came to visit, there was always squealing and laughter in the flat. Jessica enjoyed these visits. Alex turned out to be not only a wonderful husband, but also a caring father. And the man made no distinction between Lillian and his sons. He paid equal attention to all of them. When time passed, the boys grew up and went to kindergarten. Jessica was finally able to return to work. Of course, there was no need for money as before, but the woman loved what she was doing. Besides, she liked the team and socializing. She didn't want to become a housewife at all, although Alex had suggested it to her more than once. Jessica explained her decision to her husband, and he, as always, understood her. She and Alex have been together for 6 years now. These years have changed Jessica a lot. She became more calm, more feminine, more peaceful. How could she not be when she's with someone she never dreamed of? He's so unbelievably good at everything. But now Jessica suddenly runs through the streets of the city after her ideal husband, who apparently is in a hurry to meet his mistress. The woman did not believe Camila's words when she said that she had seen Alex several times in a cafe with a spectacular lady. Jessica felt sorry for her friend. She so desperately wanted what she had: a husband, children, a strong family. Jessica knew that Camila was a little jealous of her and thought that what she said about Alex was either made up or a mistake. But here he is, Alex. Strangely dressed, unshaven, some kind of very tired, going all out, whereas he should be at home with the baby at this time. Here, at last, is the restaurant. The man walked in there. Jessica waited a while to avoid bumping into her husband at the door, then slipped into the establishment as well. The woman chose a far corner table behind a palm tree tub. She could hardly be seen there. It's a cozy vantage point. But Alex, Jessica's husband, was seated at a table against the opposite wall, far enough away to not hear his conversation, but well enough to observe. And yes, Alex wasn't alone. Kimberly, the blonde girl Camila had mentioned, was already waiting for him at the table. She wasn't wrong, it turns out. Indeed, the girl is quite attractive, and so attentive looking at the man, so keen to tell him something. Alex answered one-word answers, looked at the interlocutor with interest, nodded in time with her words. His eyes remained somehow very anxious. Probably he was telling his mistress how he was fed up with life with his wife and 3 children. Maybe even complaining that he had to carry someone else's child. All complexes and stereotypes, once tortured, have long been hushed up, but suddenly they have risen again. Only heads were raised. Jessica was desperately jealous of Alex for this talkative beauty. And it also hurt. It hurt that those around her, including Camila, were right. A man like Alex would never be happy with a woman like her, Jessica. He needs someone brighter, more presentable, like this blonde. Alex suddenly lowered his head as if he heard something sad or frightening. The blonde put a hand on his shoulder. A gentle, soothing gesture. The man covered her palm with his. They smiled at each other. Jessica's eyes darkened with emotion. If before this conversation could be written off as a business conversation, now it couldn't be. Alex suddenly got up from his seat and moved towards the smoking room. That seemed strange, too. Alex had never smoked and generally kept to a healthy lifestyle. Jessica did not miss the opportunity to follow her husband. Now she would talk to him, ask about the blonde. Jessica does not intend to wait for the evening, and in such a situation, the man will be confused and will not be able to come up with an excuse or lie on the fly. The surprise effect. Seeing Jessica, Alex glanced at her indifferently at first. Something was wrong with him. Something subtly unfamiliar slid into the features of the man he loved. Was he so changed by the company of his mistress? And how can he remain so calm when he sees his wife at this very moment? Jessica fixed her gaze on the man. An angry look. Alex raised his eyebrows in surprise, looking at her face, and suddenly there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. It was as if he remembered Jessica and recognized her at last. The situation was becoming more and more incomprehensible. "Alex, can you explain to me what's going on here?" Jessica didn't expect her voice to shake as tears came to her eyes. "You must be Jessica," Alex smiled embarrassedly. Only now the woman noticed the deep old scar on the man's temple and the tattoo on his arm. Also, the man seemed to be thinner than Alex. "Who are you?" Jessica exhaled. She swayed and grabbed the ledge of the wall to keep from falling. The man immediately supported her with care. His movements, his facial expressions, his facial features, everything was exactly like Alex's. And yet it wasn't him. Now, finding herself very close to him, Jessica could see. It was perfectly clear. "It's probably for the best," the man smiled. "I didn't know how to tell you about myself, even though I found you almost a month ago. I've been living in your town all this time. Bridget and I. She's a private detective. By the way, she's the one who helped me with this search. She and I have been gathering evidence and proof. There's no doubt now. Now comes the hard part. Dating." "I don't understand anything," Jessica said. It's not surprising. The story is so unique in its own way. Any Indian film could top it. "I thought you were my husband." "That's understandable. I mean, Alex and I are natural copies of each other. Twin clones. My husband is the only child in the family," Jessica objected weakly. If Kimberly and Jonathan had other children, they would have told me about it. You knew it had taken a long time for the elderly couple to become parents. Alex is a very late and long-awaited child, and he was born alone. I suggest we go to the table. Bridget and I will tell you all about it." Jessica nodded weakly. The blonde raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw Jessica. But Bridget seemed to recognize her at least. She addressed Jessica by her first name. "This is a truly incredible story," Bridget said. "It will change your husband's life, and yours, of course." It was Bridget who started the story. A man who looked uncannily like Alex, whose name, as it turned out, was Travis, periodically interjected his lines, adding to it, correcting it. In faraway Florida lived a large family: mom, dad, and 4 children. The couple had no education, no parental support. All their property was a 2-room flat in a dilapidated 2-story barracks on the edge of town. It was a wooden building, shriveled by time, an emergency dwelling. But the large family had no other home in sight. There was a catastrophic lack of money. The head of the family worked part-time. Wherever he could, he would plow a vegetable garden, help someone to re-roof a roof, unload a lorry in a shop. In a word, a laborer. In the morning he would go out in search of money, and in the evening he would return often drunk, but without money. The mother of the family almost never worked. She had no time. She was pregnant, or with another baby on her hands. It is a joke. For 6 years of life together, the couple managed to produce 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. It would seem quite enough, given the initial conditions, even overkill. But the mother of many children was of a different opinion. Firstly, the children were paid an allowance. Secondly, having a baby in her arms, you could legally not work. Her husband all dreamed that when the younger ones grow up, his wife will help him in making money for the family. But his other half had other plans. And in general, the woman loved children, especially when they are very young, touching, chubby as kittens' lumps that smell so nice. How could she deny herself this pleasure? In general, contrary to the expectations of the head of the family, my wife got pregnant. For the 5th time. She twisted her arm round my finger, saying something about safe days. Women can do it when they want to. The husband despaired when he learned he was about to become a father again. It was too much to wait for another one. And then there were suspicions that there was more than one child under his wife's heart. Something suspiciously fast-growing belly this time. The mother of many children did not go to ultrasound. There was no money, and she had not registered before. Only to fray her nerves, to go to the counseling center for nothing. No, the lady was already experienced. She knew that it is most convenient to surrender to doctors on the eve of childbirth, but experienced acquaintances unanimously assured twins. The old lady on the ground floor, a former midwife. It was 2 heads in the belly of the pregnant woman felt. Twins. "I'm telling you for sure," the neighbor said authoritatively. "I'm never wrong." The woman smiled happily, and her husband clutched his head. And twins, too. At that time, the father of many children found a good part-time job tending the bushes in the house of a wealthy businessman, Jonathan. He was famous in town. Every dog knew that he owned a chain of restaurants and cafes. The man was lucky enough to get a seasonal part-time job with him. Jonathan paid well, didn't take any offense. The work was not dusty, simple. And what a magnificent house. And the garden, it was a pleasure to work in it. People lived, but the rich couple didn't look happy. And the new gardener quickly found out the reason. It turns out that the couple could not become parents. It didn't work, that's all. Some kind of health problem for the wife. The father of many children then still grinned to himself. His wife would have such problems. The businessman took his wife everywhere, where she was not only treated, but the result nothing. And such things happen. One day the wife of the owner could not stand it and burst into tears right in the garden. Jonathan clumsily consoled her, trying to find words. It was then that the father of many children had the idea. He waited until Jonathan was alone and approached him with a proposal. "You can't have a baby. I've got 4 on the shop floor, and I've got twins on the way. Where can we put them? We can't afford them. So maybe we'll give you the kids at a fair price. My wife hasn't registered with the doctors, so the babies don't even exist on paper. What do you think?" Jonathan was outraged at first, shouted at the gardener. But a couple of days later, he called him in for a serious talk. It turned out that the businessman discussed the proposal with his wife, and she happily seized the opportunity to become a mother of newborn twins. That evening, the head of the family returned to his native Barak in high spirits. You bet he made such a deal and got rid of unnecessary children. And he'll make money. Besides, at least one of his descendants would live like a human being. The man even envied the unborn twins a little. Lucky kids, but his wife suddenly objected. What do you mean? Give the children away. They are my relatives. I feel them. I'm already waiting for them. I won't give my kids to anyone. Let them take a child from an orphanage, the woman insisted. Children in orphanages are often from dysfunctional families with various health problems. Our babies will be born perfectly healthy. And then, just imagine what opportunities will open before them in such a rich home. And in an orphanage, they'll have a very different life. But my wife was stubborn. No, I won't. I won't give up my children. The husband wasn't about to give up on his plan. He told Jonathan about the problem. He said his wife didn't want to part with any of the children. And then the businessman voiced a plan that could only be implemented by such an influential and rich man. When the time came for the young woman to give birth, 2 twin boys were born in the local maternity hospital. The woman in labor was a little surprised the staff had not shown her so much care and attention in previous times. Don't worry. It's because you have twins, the midwife reassured her. Twins always get special treatment. Everything will be fine. But the midwife was wrong. In the morning, the mother of many children was given only one son to feed. The second one did not survive the night, she was sadly told. In fact, the baby had been secretly handed over to Jonathan's family. That was the plan he had proposed to the gardener. That same night, Kimberly also arrived at the maternity hospital, supposedly with contractions starting. No one was to suspect that the baby wasn't hers. She and Jessica were discharged on the same day. Jessica was greeted by her husband and older children, happy with the successful outcome. And Kimberly had a grand discharge with music, balloons, and a guest photographer. No one, except a very limited circle of people, knew that the babies held by these women were actually twin brothers. Those who were privy to the secret kept silent after receiving a round sum of money and a stern warning. That's how it happened, Bridget finished. Alex ended up in Jonathan's family, and Travis was separated from his blood relatives. But not for long. After a couple of years, all the children from that family were taken away by the guardianship authorities. At that time, Travis was already an older brother, and another girl was born. So I grew up in an orphanage, Travis continued. I wouldn't say my childhood was very hard. We had a good life, peaceful. We were brought up, educated. I graduated from the College of Mathematics and Computer Science. Now I work as a programmer. I have a family in the capital, a wife, 2 children, a flat. Everything as it should be. Jessica flapped her eyes confusedly, looking at Travis. What a story. Really like a fairy tale. How would Alex feel about it? Good thing she was the first to know she could prepare her husband. It'll be a real shock for him, won't it? And the mother-in-law, they're elderly people. They should be told too, but very delicately. Jessica couldn't decide how to feel about Alex's parents' behavior. On the one hand, it was immoral and illegal. On the other hand, her husband lived in luxurious conditions, not wandering around in orphanages. And the childless couple were happy to have a child. My mother sometimes visited me at the orphanage, Travis continued. I guess she loved children, but she was just irresponsible. She brought me cheap candy, stroked my head. We didn't starve at the orphanage, of course, but I waited for those visits and sweets like manna from heaven. Because it is important for every child to know that he is loved. Growing up, Travis did not abandon his mother, helped her with money, tried to treat her. She drank heavily. Because of this, father died early. But the son could not perform a miracle and change his mother. He only had to support her and watch her sink and lose her human form. One day the woman became seriously ill. Liver problems began, not surprising after years of alcoholism. Travis visited his mother in the hospital, bought medicines, but the doctors didn't give a single chance. The days were running out. The elderly woman realized this and one day told her son Travis, the only one of the children who had not abandoned her. This story of twins, a wealthy family and a child given to a childless, wealthy couple. The husband had once revealed the truth to his wife, after another feast, explained where he had suddenly got a large sum of money from back then. More than 20 years have passed, so the woman was not particularly surprised by that story, but of course remembered the story of her husband. She was even happy for her son, who now lived like a prince, without needing anything. She praised her husband for his decision. The mother wanted to find Jonathan's family just to have a look at the other twin. But the businessman and his family moved somewhere almost immediately after they got the baby. Jonathan sold the business, the house, the property, and seemed to disappear. As I found out later, he started a new life in another city, bought a completely different business, settled in a new place. That is, right here, Travis said. Jessica felt a mixture of feelings: surprise, joy, anxiety, and relief. Relief that Alex was faithful to her and not making things up. But what a shock to their entire family. Alex will probably be happy to hear the news about a twin, because he has dreamed of a brother since childhood. It was his only wish, which his parents could never fulfill. I was happy when I heard my mother's story, too, Travis continued. She was gone the next day, by the way. If she'd kept quiet, she would have taken that secret to her grave. But now I knew I had a twin brother. And I was determined to find him at any cost. I'd kept in touch with my other siblings all along, all of whom had grown up to be decent people, educated, with families. But a twin brother, your exact copy, your natural clone, that's a whole other thing. Travis hired private investigator Bridget. Bridget got to work and very quickly got on the trail. Jonathan Smith, was that difficult? The girls smiled. They'd moved away from Alex's birth family, of course, but they hadn't done much to cover their tracks. I found them quickly. We've been here for a month now, Travis smiled. We've been looking around, gathering the latest evidence that this isn't a mistake. Although the most important evidence here is Alex's appearance. We're practically identical. Even you and your wife didn't realize it right away. The final proof is ready. There's no mistake, Jessica asked. The next step is for the brothers to meet. That's the step Travis is hesitant to take Bridget's side. And then suddenly you guys came along. It just happened, she said. Well, Jessica smiled. So we'll all have a celebratory dinner tonight. I'll be waiting for everyone at home. I need time to get Alex ready, so come round at 8. You know the address, don't you? Of course we do, Travis answered. Arriving at the call to the little girl, Christy froze when she saw her husband, who left on a business trip yesterday, A4. Christy walked over to the coffee machine to make herself a double shot of hot, strong savior. She had night duty in the ER tonight, and she'd never learned to sleep half an hour between calls. Any rest is just a bother. The nimble nurse Vanessa, with whom the pediatric ambulance doctor has already gone through many difficult cases, about sleep joked. Uncle Sleep has come to me again. He is starving me even on the move. I can't get coffee in me anymore. Energy drinks in bright metal cans, alas, do not save me. And they're disgusting. When the life of a child somewhere in their city held on the edge, balancing on the edge of the abyss, Vanessa was able to gather so that the doctor only marveled. Iron nerves, iron character, she remembered from her youth, a phrase either from a cartoon or from song. From herself, she mentally added, and a heart of gold of enormous size, which manages to fit love for the whole world. After each return from a call, Vanessa and their driver, Miles, fell asleep with their heads barely touching the cushions on the sofas in the lounge. Their crew chief, Christy, on the other hand, felt everything at her post, always staying fully alert. Christy embraced the still steaming cup with both hands, blissfully sipped her favorite smell with her nose, and thought with pleasure. I'll come home after my shift. I don't need to cook anything. There are a couple of cutlets in the fridge and the rest of yesterday's mashed potatoes. Winston's husband had been away on a business trip since this morning. Free the parrots from cooking for 3 days ahead. The woman stretched her legs out on the coffee table, peering at her assistants. Ashley was dozing sweetly to the peaceful hum of the split system. It had been a sweltering summer this year. The machine had been working like crazy for the past 24 hours. Where did it get its mechanical strength? Miles was sleeping peacefully. Everyone at the ambulance station knew he was in love with Cynthia. But for some reason he was hesitant to confess his feelings to her. The 6'2" big man had been in the hot zone as a contract serviceman. After the injury, Miles lost his wife, who did not want to see in the house of a freak with a scar across the cheek. In the presence of rambunctious Vanessa, the former Miles turned into a timid lamb, stammered when she asked him questions. He would blush if they made unwitting contact. Christy smiled, remembering how her Winston had cut interested circles around her almost 20 years ago. He'd approached her in the park, where she was cramming Latin on a spring afternoon so she wouldn't fail her medical school exam. "May I sit down? Is the bench next to you free?" The pretty, blonde-haired Christy flashed her gray-green eyes at him and moved her thick briefcase with textbooks closer to her. "Why didn't you like the neighboring benches? There are plenty of unoccupied benches." "I've always liked that bench in the shade of the chestnut tree. I come here often," said Winston, the burly man, and he turned red all over. "Then my arguments are over. You amuse me, girl. Let's get acquainted, shall we?" I can't dare to take the initiative myself, and holding out his palm, sweating with excitement, a little frightened, Winston. Winston did not shake Christy's hand. He began frantically wiping the moisture on his light summer trousers. Christy lightly touched his hand with her fingertips and said, "And I'm Christy. For short, Chris. Sometimes my friends also call me Christine. The nickname stuck to me when I was a kid." Winston smiled happily and said, "I'd like to earn the right to be called Christina, too." "I'd like to earn the right to call you Christy, too, so I can be your friend. And let's switch to you." "Let's do it," replied the girl. "Why all the curtsy and ceremony at our age?" Christy had to run to the dormitory that day so that she could be fresh in her Latin exam tomorrow. With Winston, they agreed that he would wait for her outside the institute. If she passed the exam, they would go for ice cream and cakes at the Boulevard Patisserie. The red light on the emergency station's console lit up. The dispatcher was quickly recording something on the computer screen while making notes in the work log. "Squad, on your way. I've already uploaded the address to Miles on the app. Hurry up. It's a house on the edge of town. Baby's suffocating. Parents can't figure out what's causing the sudden attack." Vanessa quickly threw on her medical uniform and rushed down the stairs from the first floor. "Christy, I brought my suitcase. Even had time to slip your file folder in next to it. Let's not waste any time. I have a feeling this is going to be an unusual case." Quickly throwing themselves into the car, which was already parked under the vapors, the friendly trio under Christy's leadership moved on the road. The night city was slowly falling behind the hot heat of the day. It even seemed to Miles that at times the asphalt under the wheels of the old car was melting. But there was no time to think about it, and he drove carefully and quickly. If the road continued to be so deserted, they would get there in about an hour. Christy, sitting next to the chauffeur, thought, "I should have put Vanessa and Miles next to each other for that hour." As Miles drove the car at top speed, in the back of the car Vanessa was thinking sad thoughts. She had 30 years of life under her belt, not the easiest. An orphan since the 3rd year of high school. Her family was the rare case where the father of the family, who disliked strange ladies, disappeared from the house one fine autumn evening. And it all started when the woman, the mother of the household, left. Vanessa's mother fell in love with a young chef colleague and followed him to the ends of the earth. Y isn't going for 5 years practically to Alaska as head of production in a newly opened restaurant the edge of geography. After such a treacherous act of his wife, Vanessa's father went off the chain, methodically went through the entire flat, carefully searching for any images of his wife. Torn to shreds wedding photos that stood in a frame on the dresser and in the wall behind the glass, destroyed traces of the mother of little Vanessa in the bathroom. When he inadvertently flicked a view of his wife's forgotten bottle of perfume off the shelf, it shattered with a pitiful crunch against the tile on the floor. And the man stood there and stomped the shards with his feet, as if he had trampled the remains of his love in the bathtub into solid ground. Then the smell of mum was still lingering and persistent. Vanessa was only 10 years old at the time. She still couldn't understand what was wrong with her if her mum left her with her dad without even talking to her goodbye. The word love was unknown to her. Her parents did not show any romantic tendencies. They were reserved and businesslike with each other. Later, analyzing her childhood, or rather what she remembered from it, Vanessa gave herself a promise to raise the chosen one to heaven with her warm affection, not to repeat the mistakes of her parents. The girl's father drowned his longing in a rather peculiar way. He didn't resort to the bottle. He plunged headlong into work. The man who had been abandoned by his wife worked as a plumber. The master was such that to him for a couple of months queues lined up. If it was necessary to install an expensive bathtub or toilet in an elite flat without a hitch, none of the luxurious side not to scratch no one around even guessed that the miracle plumber set himself a grandiose task to earn fabulous money, fly to his wife to the north, to prove that he was her the only one favorite man, from which do not run away. In a beautiful tin box from under a walnut sausage, the master collected notes of different denominations, not once even allowing himself to spend a couple of dollars on beer. The bundle grew, became a thick pile, and pleasantly warmed his hands with its heaviness. At this time, the object of his dreams there in the north, having found himself in an unaccustomed environment, did not cope with the cold realities. The tragedy was so trivial that the neighbors, the recently arrived restaurant manager, only shook their heads when they learned that she had decided to walk a couple of blocks home without a company car in the worst blizzard. The mother of little Vanessa was lost in the snowy captivity already after a couple of steps from the sky. Snowflakes descended not smoothly, as she was used to. They came down dark, icy, piercing, like a flock of large birds of prey. They covered her mouth, her nose. She couldn't breathe. Her knees buckled, as if the harsh winter had struck her with a stick. She settled helplessly into the snowdrift. There was no strength to scream, to call for help. When an hour later her husband, who began to worry, did not find her friend at home, organized a search. When the woman was found, she was still alive. She passed away later, quietly. The southern body could not cope with pneumonia. So Vanessa became a half-orphan. But they found out what had happened much later. The criminal story of Vanessa's father himself could easily have been the subject of a detective story. After his wife's sudden escape, he worked like a man possessed for a year. Finally, he'd saved up what he thought would be a strong argument for bringing his wife home. The savings came in handy, but there was no flight from their town to the far north. He had to get to a larger airport by train first. The compartment companions seemed like nice guys. They had elite French cognac in their bag. He couldn't even pronounce its name clearly. He had Ossetian pies from a nearby bakery, a couple of his favorite juicy lemons, a chocolate bar. Vanessa's father had a sweet tooth. It was a hearty dinner. He didn't even realize he was going somewhere. He became sluggish, relaxed, began to tell his new friends the story of his life. Even traitorous tears came to his eyes. When the neighbors offered him to play a few games of fool, he did not even suspect that such a gambling game only in his hands held no more than a dozen times in his life. Therefore, at the remark, "Well, you've got to be kidding. Even with epaulettes you left us. You should play for money, lucky boy. In no time you'll leave everyone here without trousers." Lucky reacted with enthusiasm. Who would give up his money bag so easily? Everyone threw in $1 on the card game. A ridiculous amount just for fun. In front of the eyes of the woe traveler, paper pictures with kings and ladies were spinning like in a mystical trick. You only had time to figure out what to throw on the table once again with a fan of colorful portraits. The first $1,000 to cheerful mates Vanessa's father lost out of pure interest, for a light drive. How did this amount in 1 hour increased 100 times? I couldn't even figure it out. My head felt like cast iron. My eyes were all blurry. For some reason he wanted to sleep. The last thing he heard as he fell into the viscous darkness was, "Ashley, help Winston, he's got his heel on his money bag." Then silence and darkness. For some reason it seemed to him that he was no longer in a compartment sitting on a bed cozily separated by a caring conductor, but was swaying together with the carriage in some narrow metal space. A sharp scraping of something metal, cold wind, wet drops of rare rain in his face. Oh, flight. The body of my father, who had been thrown out of the train, was found a couple of weeks later in a dense roadside thicket, quite by chance, between two settlements near the railway track. In these places even mushroom pickers and holiday makers appeared very rarely. And here a couple of lovers were brought into the forest belt. They rode their bicycles, spent some time alone, without prying eyes, and were about to go home. Attention was attracted by a red rag in the bushes, which turned out to be a colored sports bag. Then there was a long identification of the deceased, search for relatives. That's when it turned out that Vanessa's mum wasn't alive either. Where did the money intended for the restoration of the family go? How did the man end up near the railway line? No one ever found out. There was a man, and then he was gone for nothing. Vanessa, left for the period of her father's departure to the north in the care of a kind-hearted neighbor, was sent by the guardianship authorities to an orphanage. And their new walls, a new life. She was a sociable girl. Other children in the state institution shut themselves off. She, on the contrary, as if opened up to her peers and carers in her studies and in all activities. Vivacious Vanessa, with a mop of blonde hair, brown mocha-colored eyes, and a slim figure, is ahead of the world. Her favorite subjects are biology and chemistry, hobby participation in a series of theater productions. But also in sports competitions, hikes among the girls, the best friend is not to be found. In one of the educational outings, classmate Vanessa stepped on a rusty nail. Bad place, bad wound. Even the gym teacher and the young teacher were confused. It was more than a kilometer to the camp. Blood was gushing from Anthony's wound, scarlet, boiling. Vanessa and the others looked at the wound for a few seconds. Then they couldn't even tell how the fearless girl had made a tourniquet above the injured place from some rope that had come from nowhere, and shouted into the crowd. Write down for Cynthia the time she knitted it and call her. Now. She tore the white cotton shirt she wore into improvised bandages. Quickly get the first aid kit. See what disinfectants I've got, Vanessa commanded. Some aunt forgot to put a fresh batch of sterile bandages in it before the trip. A little later, having recovered from the shock, the gym teacher threw his jacket over the shoulders of the girl, who remained in one thin top. With the help of 2 students, he made a stretcher out of tree branches. The boy could hardly walk on his own, limping and writhing in pain. Already at the orphanage, in the inpatient medical room, Cynthia told Vanessa after the ambulance had left. I've just heard the doctors praise you for the first aid you gave so expertly. You're the one who should be singing an ode to you, not me. The old crow. Didn't you check before the trip that the first aid kit was poorly equipped? Shame on my gray head. Where did you get this professional knowledge, child? Vanessa laughed and replied, I don't know. Firstly, I love films and TV series about doctors. Secondly, it's like someone is sitting inside me and telling me, take this, and do that. That's how it came about by itself. That Vanessa chose for herself the future profession of a medic. It was not by necessity of compulsory study somewhere after the orphanage, but by a great sincere love. The ambulance drove heavily up the slight rise at the end of the alley and stopped in front of the house at 10 7th Avenue. Christy deftly picked up her suitcase and walked briskly to the wicket. Vanessa was already standing behind her, covering her rear, as usual. An old brass bell was visible on the wooden gate. And Christy thought, it's a rarity. It must have been out of commission a long time ago. But the bell did not let her down. It rang loudly in the dead silence of the empty street. Confident footsteps sounded behind the wicket, and the next moment it swung open. A silent scene. The audience might have stood up and announced the neighborhood with a tumultuous, prolonged applause. In front of Christy stood her husband, Winston, who had left on a business trip that morning. On seeing his wife, the husband stammered and whispered, Come in, please. The girl is in the house, in the back room. Christy and Vanessa rushed through the house. Iron hammers rang in the former's head. All the questions later. Right now, it's just the girl and her life. But what does it all mean? Why is Winston here? What has he got to do with this little girl? The anteroom smelled hauntingly of dusty candles piled by the front door. There was a general lack of tidiness that was evidently a constant feature of the place. In the next room were the aromas of yesterday's borscht, which had already passed more than one test, biscuits, and a little cinnamon. The little patient was lying on a small sofa, and a young lady of exotic appearance was rushing around her. Seeing her mummy, Christy was a little confused. Dreadlocks of frightened hair the color of acid fuchsia, eyes thickly lined with black. Bottom jeans with huge fancy scuffs on the knees, top a shapeless t-shirt with a strange pattern on it. The thought fluttered helplessly in my head again. Winston. What is her Winston doing here? A lover of immaculate cleanliness and classic style and dress, he couldn't possibly be here by definition, but he was standing next to her, looking at her with the pathetic eyes of a sick dog. Vanessa felt the ridiculousness of the situation. In a loud voice, she commanded, "Stand back. Let the doctor examine the girl. And you, Mummy, quickly tell us what's going on." The baby lying on the pillow was so similar in appearance to Winston that Christie's heart almost stopped. Christie listened intently, a heartbeat or two she was sure to miss. It became clear that angina, neurological swelling, had affected her larynx. The girl could barely breathe. There were signs of hives on her face. The little girl involuntarily pulled her hand to the nasty spots, trying to scratch them. Surprisingly, Winston was the one to answer the EMT's questions. It was as if Christie had been poured a bucket of ice water on him, and he seemed to jump right in, too. "My daughter and I were at the circus today," he began. "There's a touring show with little artists. Ponies. Our little girl is obsessed with horses." In the second act, just as the show started, Cassandra's lips started to swell. And then her face started to swell in front of her eyes. I knew right away that something was wrong. We went to the Circus Medical Center, where my daughter was given some antihistamine. The swelling went away in a flash and we went home. At home, everything was fine at first, but then Cassandra started to wheeze. I found some sawdust from the circus arena in her hands. It turned out that when she was being wheeled around by one of the pony horses at intermission, she had picked up a handful of chopped up wooden pieces on the floor, all the while sniffing them to remember how beautiful her horse was. I assume it's a severe allergy. Christie listened to his monologue and couldn't believe her ears. My daughter and I went home. Who is Winston saying all those words about? How can this be? For a moment, rainbow circles swam before her eyes. She met Vanessa's gaze and she realized the doctor wasn't feeling well. Christie was about to faint right in the middle of this small, stuffy room. Of course, Vanessa knew her colleague's husband. Undoubtedly, she realized that her doctor's handler knew nothing about her husband having a child on the side. In a decisive move, the nurse sat Christie down in a chair, waved the cotton wool soaked in ammonia in front of her nose. Only said a few words. "Suspected Quinkie's oedema. We'll get her to the hospital." The doctor nodded dejectedly. "It's a serious condition, no matter how severe the bronchial spasm." Vanessa was ready. The adrenaline and prednisolone should have bought them time. After the injections, Cassandra's face began to take on a normal color. Vanessa commented, turning to the man, "Don't just stand there. Go outside, tell our driver to bring a stretcher. We'll transport the girl to the hospital. We must try to avoid other, more complicated manipulations. I wouldn't want to put a tube in her trachea for a little girl like that." Christie acted like a robot, automatically. She woke up when she and Winston were already in the car, sitting on either side of the girl. Cassandra's breathing was still intermittent, but noticeably evened out. Winston kept his anxious eyes on the child, full of longing. And Christie was reminded of something else. After they had first met and she had passed her Latin exam, their relationship had developed rapidly. Within a week, they couldn't live a day without each other, unconditionally liked by parents on both sides. After Christie's 4th year, they married, moved into the flat of the glorious grandmother Winston. Cheerful old lady rushed to her younger sister in the village, where she enthusiastically engaged in the cultivation of flowers. She could not be lured back to the city. Christie and Winston lived soul to soul. To quarrel or to start something to find out it was not about them. They were always on the same page about everything. Tough Winston worked as a swimming coach at a children's sports school. Christie safely graduated from medical school, was going to residency. But she couldn't decide on a specialty, she joked. "I see myself as an ophthalmologist in a white coat, then Aunt Doctor in the office with a mass of shining metal instruments." Fate forced her to make a choice. After defending her diploma, as if by some command from above, "Now you can," Christie became pregnant. 9 months later, another sturdy little boy, Anthony, was born. Their cat, their love, and their joy. Everything developed as it should. As the happy head of the family often joked. It's time to sit sits confidently. It's time to walk stomp briskly. Christy, at that time a little away from medicine, all tried to spend more time with his son. As if intuition suggested that this carelessness will not last long, trouble knocked on their family's door when Anthony was 3 years old. Christy's mentor, who had always told the young woman that she had an aptitude for medicine, hinted that in another 6 months she would not be welcome in any medical institution. This profession loves those who do not get distracted and are constantly improving. Even before learning that she was about to become a mum, Christy had changed her plans for her specialization. As future patients, she appointed the youngest infants, newborns. She decided to become a neonatologist, scrupulously studied all sorts of pathologies in crumbs, barely born. She was lost in the pediatric intensive care unit. But then her fervor waned. Anthony took up all her time and thoughts. To return to her chosen field of medicine, Christy had to plunge into the thick of current events of the department, where she found a place for a novice pediatrician. Anthony, the big boy, went to daycare. Winston continued his activities with his charges in the sports section. Everything in their family flowed according to the planned course. A couple of months later, the kindergarten teacher asked Christy to look at her in the methodology room after work. Here she told the boy's mother her observations and concerns. But first she asked, "Do you notice anything strange about your son lately?" Christy raised her eyebrows in surprise and opened her amazed eyes wide. "My husband and I both work very hard. We see Anthony most of the time in the evenings, but he seems healthy and alert. What exactly made you suspicious?" "We were preparing for a matinee in the group. All the folk dances the kids weren't doing right. Anthony, having made another round of the music room with his little partner, stopped abruptly and sat down on the children's chair. I didn't think much of it at the time, but your son started stopping as he walked more and more often. Christy, it seemed to me that his lips were turning a bluish color at this point. And yesterday we had a checkup with the pediatrician from our local hospital. She advised to show the boy to a pediatric cardiologist. I'm a doctor myself, also a pediatrician. I could not see anything in my son," Christy confidently replied to the teacher. And she thought to herself, or could. Without delay, the next day she took Anthony to her home department. The doctor's verdict was overwhelming. "Your son has a rare form of heart defect, which usually manifests itself only by the age of 3 or 4 years. The only way out is an urgent operation, otherwise he will not live for 6 months. His condition will worsen every day. In our city, such a complex surgical intervention is impossible. The experience of such operations has already been gained in New York. Cardiac surgery centers in Germany, Switzerland, or Israel will also be able to cope well with it." Christy and Anthony walked home with slow steps. It seemed that now her boy would get sick and his heart would not hold out. Winston rushed from the sports school as soon as she called him, and Christy kept poring over textbooks, notes, medical literature. It appeared that in their case, a favorable and a fatal outcome were equally likely, 50-50. Where can I find the point that will make the swing go in the right direction? The cost of the rare and complex surgery in New York was fabulous. As time flew by, Christy and Winston were unable to raise the necessary sum. Even selling her grandmother's old flat with her permission and moving into a one-room flat in the suburbs did not even out the balance. When one of the charitable foundations intervened in the seemingly hopeless case, everything moved forward. Finally, the operation and treatment were paid for, tickets to New York were bought, and things were packed. But Anthony died on the operating table. The swing didn't want to lean in the direction of their marital happiness and well-being. There was no negligence, no medical error, no serious preconditions, just the severe illness itself. Christy, being a pediatrician, understood all this perfectly well. But her heart froze the moment the surgeon came out of the operating theater and waved his hands, saying nothing. She and Winston understood everything at once. There was no cry, no sigh. Only they hugged each other tighter. They seemed to stand like that the whole time their son was trying to be saved under the cold glow of the bright lamps. They returned home devastated. Christy kept saying, "It's time's fault. We let it slip away, while we were trying to raise money for the operation. If we'd come to New York sooner, everything would have been fine." Then she took a course to retrain as a pediatrician to work in an ambulance. It became important to her to save at least someone else's baby. That's when she first told her husband her motto. We are always responsible for everything. Some people just go through life without realizing it. 2 years after Anthony's death, Winston talked to Christy about having a second child. She herself couldn't explain why she felt the way she did now. She didn't want to give birth again, didn't want to have another child. She wanted to devote all her efforts, abilities and skills henceforth only to children in distress, sick, injured, but not her own. Winston accepted it. He did not start any more conversations on this subject, did not hint. He was there for him, his own, dear to his heart. And now, they rode side by side beside his daughter by some strange girl. Christy wouldn't even mentally call her mother. As in a delirium at the bottom of her soul ruled only one thought: what could her husband and this miracle in feathers have in common? On that distant June day, when Winston wandered through the fields of the local park, it did not occur to him that on one of the benches he was waiting for his fate in the form of a girl with gorgeous gray-green eyes. A lovely beauty who had no equal in the whole world. Pretty as hell in his male sense. She was fiddling with a biro, whispering intently with her lips. She twisted a thick strand of hair on her finger, wrinkled her nose, chewed a sausage sandwich, drinking some drink from a plastic bottle, and turned the pages again. She did it all at the same time, without any confusion about the sequence of actions. Winston fell in love at first sight. His feet brought him to the bench and the girl. And then he was a little confused, so he said the first thing that came into his head, but he did not lose the power of speech. She herself had offered to meet him. She didn't refuse to go with him the next day to the ice cream parlor. In any love family story, there are two faces, two participants, two heroes. If someone were to write down Winston and Christy's memories, there would be two similar stories on paper. They realized they loved and wanted to be together. They were close, they were friendly, they understood each other. Wanted, waited, and then raised Anthony together. Everything was the same, shared. Everything was shared. Together they met a misfortune like no other. The son left, they stayed. Not by the laws of nature, the older outlived the younger. Winston fanatically wanted another child, but Christy closed the subject, perhaps forever. At his sports school, he prepared his pupils so fiercely for competition that 2 of them first took silver and gold at the city competition, and then distinguished themselves as first in the state and went on to the federal level. Invitations to competitions all over the country came pouring out of the horn. The head coach even hinted that they might be in the running for the national cup. Christy almost did not notice now his endless trips to all sorts of business trips. She was sure that the adventures on the side of her husband will not look for adventures. They unconditionally remained the closest people who were not spared by grief. Each of them escaped from memories in his own way. That trip to a tempting picturesque resort in Florida, which was in full preparation for the soon-to-be Olympic Games, was unusual from the start. It was still a year and a half before the world's most important competition. Construction was boiling everywhere in the city. The coach and his team even tried out a new hotel and cafe on the embankment, which were designed for guests. Having appeared on a magnificent, beautiful landscape as fallen on the coast, and then also having won in the next competitions, all were going home happy. When buying tickets, the following fact came to light: too many professional people from all over the country were traveling back and forth to Florida at that time. Travel documents became scarce. The coach was forced to buy a ticket in a sleeping car SV. In a compartment for 2 with a neighbor was a girl, as it later turned out, Megan, a painter. She was going home to the city on holiday. She'd bought her ticket at the last minute too. Brown hair, blue eyes. God had a bit of a brain. She was always talking rubbish. Winston shouldn't have baptized his children with her. Athletic build, well-muscled figure, serious look, inquisitive eyes. Women always liked him, but he wasn't interested in that. He was attached to his burden, by common joys and sad ties. He paid little attention to other ladies, even if they gave him unequivocal attention. The girl in the compartment was about 10 years younger than he was. When he entered, she was eating a pie with potatoes and drinking a Coke. She nodded at the greeting, introduced herself. Terry. I'm going on holiday 9 months almost without a day off. Painter on the objects for a fortnight. The foreman gave me a holiday. Sit down. Why are you frozen like a pillar? We're here for almost 24 hours. This monologue made Winston sit down on the second shelf. The train started peacefully. A beautiful landscape floated outside the window. 10 minutes later, his boys came to visit him and immediately began to tease the coach. "Chief, can't we switch places? Such a girl is traveling with you. You won't shame the team's victories on all fronts." Terry was easy. She didn't flirt. She didn't make eyes at him. She didn't flirt with him. She didn't flirt at all. She gave him some cakes, took one of his sandwiches, went to the conductors for coffee for the two of them, waved him off. Some things women are entitled to by status. I'm already 23 years old. I look younger because of my small stature, but I'm already a lady of stature. The passenger train glided smoothly along the smooth tracks. The day outside the window changed to a long black night with few bright lights of stars in the sky. Winston and Terry discussed the latest Hollywood premieres, the mores of show business stars, the beauty of Miami, and then languidly told each other a couple of anecdotes from what they could remember. Then the conversation dried up, and they decided to go to bed. Winston flipped through some railway newspapers for a while. Terry delved into a detective story. Boring. They both lay down on their sides with their backs to their traveling companion and pretended to fall asleep. After half an hour of torment, Winston did doze off. He awoke to hands stroking his shoulders. "Don't be afraid, Coach. You're a brutal man." "Too hard to resist," Terry whispered. Winston twitched on the shelf, stood up abruptly, turned round to face her. "What are you doing, traveling companion? I told you I was married." "You've never been away from your wife, Winston? Never cheated on her?" "Of course you haven't," said the man angrily. But inside him the excitement was already reviving. Terry caught the change in his mood, and then what happened happened. "We hadn't talked much since this morning." "No, I don't want coffee." "Thank you," he said sharply. Since the evening, Terry did not raise her eyes to Winston, as if ashamed. In their own city, they went off to different sides of the platform. His memories of that night were strange. For some reason, he didn't even consider it cheating on his wife. And then the unexpected happened. In the middle of autumn, Winston, as usual, locked the door of the men's locker room, when a security guard called out to him from the lobby. "Winston, there's a girl here looking for you," the guard said. Going downstairs, Winston was surprised to see his traveling companion from the train to Miami on the doorstep of the children's sports school. She gestured for him to pass and said through gritted teeth, "How many partners I've had. But to get pregnant after one time, it's never happened before." "Hey, Coach, abortions are expensive these days. You're going to have to help me out with the money." Winston couldn't believe his ears. He could be a father again. He could have a son or a daughter. He would give half his life for such an opportunity. Quickly grabbing Terry under the elbow, he dragged her around the corner of the building to the summer sports field. There he sat her down on a bleacher near the football field and said loud and clear, "You will bear me this child, and I will be by your side and your husband, his father. Just dare to do anything to harm the baby, you'll be sorry." Terry resisted. "So who are you that I should waste my youth and life on your offspring? You found yourself a surrogate mum, free of charge, and then maybe someone will call me to marry and I'll be with your extra." They sat down again and discussed the terms. Winston in everything helps Terry financially, comes to her at any time at her first request. The baby's fate will be decided after birth. She in return leads a healthy lifestyle for the remaining 7 months, does not do anything that could harm the baby. They learnt about becoming parents of a girl after the next ultrasound. "I didn't want a boy, but a girl. I'll think about whether to keep it or make a present for you, Daddy. Have you already pleased your wife?" Terry sneered. Winston looked at her and thought, how could I have been so weak on the train to be around a woman like that? He kept preparing to talk to Christy, wanting to tell her everything, to apologize, but he hesitated and put off the explanation. Let the girl be born, and then he will confess everything to the woman he loves. Cassandra was born quickly, healthy, without any abnormalities. 5 days later, Winston took Terry from the hospital. Surprisingly, this perky woman treated the baby very carefully and reverently. Whether the maternal instinct woke up, or the fact that the girl was pretty quiet, calm, It was as if she felt that there was some impropriety in her birth daddy and mummy did not live together. There was no normal, in the conventional sense, family around. 3 months after the birth of his daughter, Winston offered Terry to draw up documents for adoption with the subsequent transfer of the baby to him, so that the woman again became free of any obligations. The refusal was unexpectedly abrupt. Moreover, Terry insisted that he did not tell his wife anything, otherwise she would lay down her bones, but she would separate him from Cassandra. At first, Winston was in doubt, wanted to involve lawyers to win back his daughter, and kept a close eye on whether Terry was treating the girl well. There was nothing to fault. She'd even managed to save up a decent amount of money for the baby, so there was no way to get her on the financial hook. As time went on, Winston got used to making visits to his second home, where Cassandra invariably greeted him with a joyful squeal. Sometimes they took walks together. Sometimes they even had lunch or dinner together as a big dad, mom and daughter. Christy was fanatical about her work, taking extra duty, not paying the slightest attention to her husband's absences. But if they were at home together in the rare hours, was almost the same kind, affectionate, attentive. Tired from the night vigil, the ambulance crew pulled up outside the emergency room of the Children's City Hospital. In a moment, 2 burly orderlies were already carrying a stretcher with Cassandra into the examination room. The doctors scurried about, immediately reassuring everyone that the girl's life was not in danger. Christy's mission was over. The girl was delivered without incident. Winston stayed with his daughter. Christy had to go back to the emergency substation. Later, in the evening, her husband would tell her everything honestly about those long-ago events on the train. Christy had almost calmed down by then. I am surprised that she did not consider her husband's brief affair a crime against their family. It was as if she felt all Winston's greed for this girl, in whom his dream of having a child was realized. People have different destinies. In different ways, heaven helps to find the happiness of fatherhood. Things began to look even busier between them. Christy advised her husband on which doll to buy, for the discharge of the girl bought for her sweets, birthday and New Year's gifts. Once only asked Winston why the little girl's mother had such a strange appearance. Winston explained that such metamorphosis with the appearance of Terry began to happen recently. Both of them had no idea at the time what Cassandra's mother's pink dreadlocks in her hair and her affectations would lead to. The thing was, Terry had fallen in love with the new guy on their crew. The man called himself a freelance nomadic painter, painted a portrait of her on the wall during breaks, and then painted over it himself with an even coat of colored paint. Terry had dreadlocks like his, a shade he'd recommended. The free artist didn't ask her out, didn't look languidly into her eyes, didn't shower her with gifts, didn't even hint at a rapprochement somewhere in a secluded corner of the construction site. He beckoned her with his bohemian spirit, his charm, even through the beautifully cut holes in his jeans. Refinement and aristocracy slipped into his every gesture, movement, turn of the head. What wind had brought this unrecognized genius to the construction site? Terry didn't ask herself. She only prayed that this artistic genius would not disappear from their educational horizon on some welcome day. Now she imitated her idol in everything, dressed like her gifted idol, smoked long thin cigarettes like her god, tasted like her prince for lunch rolls and wasabi, for dinner a glass of Italian wine and elite cheese with mold. Cassandra paid less and less attention, pretending to still be the perfect mother only when Winston showed up. There was no alarm at Winston's positive change in tone. By the New Year holidays, Terry felt that her love was no more visibly about to take wing between falling into the maelstrom of love. Nomad told her that he doesn't stay in one place longer than 2 or 3 months. He gets bored. Art school, where he learned a craft, abandoned in the 3rd year, won the craving for a change of places. In unknown lands, Terry broke away after the object of her love and a fortnight after the appearance of longing in his eyes. But first she was well prepared. She already knew that Winston had no secrets from his wife, so she invited them both to the cafe to talk about an important matter. Having ordered coffee and cakes for the whole company, to sweeten the pill, as she thought, she didn't beat around the bush. I've met the man of my life, it seems. The kind of love people call ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. Cassandra's no longer my thing. God knows I wasn't always such a bad mother to her. I'm attached to her in my own way. Now I want to get on with my own life. If you want, Slava, draw up the documents. I'll give you my daughter and go away. Christy was shocked by this proposal. She was not the least bit opposed to Winston's daughter living with them. But how can a mother give up her child like that? The image of Anthony's little boy floated before her eyes. A sharp needle of pain pricked at my heart. "If you'd come back, darling, I'd never give you up to anyone aloud, however," she said. "We are always responsible for our loved ones. Winston, you haven't said a word yet. And I'm ahead of the curve, as always. We agree, Terry, to take your little girl into our family. Do the necessary paperwork. We'll sign everything. And we'll get all the paperwork together on our end for Cassandra's adoption." Easily bypassing all sorts of bureaucratic hurdles, Winston and Christy adopted Cassandra in the shortest possible time. Cassandra had always been fond of her father. Her mother's departure was explained to her as a vital necessity, and she and Aunt Christy quickly hit it off. Cramped but not cramped. Now in their small one-room flat there was always a little bell-ringing voice, always taking part in all the household chores. Cassandra and Papa Winston hung the laundry on the balcony, helping Aunt Christy. And then the female half of the family would bake treats in the kitchen. From the other room came the voice of the head of the family. "Hurry up and come and have tea." That would have been the end of the story. But it is not for us to decide what fate will do. She has already prepared new trials for these people. Another team was to go to the house where the house collapsed. Somebody in the heavenly office decided otherwise. A nurse at a neighboring substation slipped on the porch. The first frost had just arrived in the city, and the insidious ice had been forgotten. Somewhere on the other side of town, near a collapsed house, an ambulance was waiting for the unfortunate victims. The medical worker's leg swelled up before his eyes. Even without x-rays, it was clear to the specialists it was a fracture. Christie's team was rushed to the scene. Vanessa, as always, Miles indispensable for traveling on any type of road, Christie focused. All assembled were good to go. Even Vanessa doesn't argue about riding in the back. She quickly climbs into the seat with Miles in the cab. No time for arguments and bickering. A couple of days ago, Christie and Vanessa had a serious conversation. Outside of work, they are friendly and on a you basis. Only at work they keep the chain of command. The doctor started the dialogue. But I began to my subordinate not for faults in the service, but for Miles. "Don't you have a heart? The whole substation is judging that Miles is pining for you, and you're like not native. I mean, he's good on the inside and out. And the scar on your face, that's a good look for a man. Why are you climbing the wall? I mean, he recoils at any touch from me. Am I unpleasant to him? Am I long? If he touches me, he bounces back. How am I supposed to understand this reaction to me? And you say he's in love. It's all bollocks." Now Vanessa drove beside Miles and again involuntarily admired his masculine profile. She was no longer intimidated by the scar that cut across his eyebrow and snaked down to his lips. Miles was attractive with that very masculine beauty that promised protection and strength to those around him. What remained a mystery was how deliberately he was avoiding her. If he loved her, why did he keep his distance? Miles was afraid to come within a meter of this woman. He was too fond of this person to offend her by an involuntary display of his masculine interest. Now, as soon as Vanessa turned briefly to the window, he glanced at her to admire her unassuming but lovely beauty again. When the nurse returned her head to its original position, Miles sat as if nothing had happened, staring straight ahead at the road. A crowd of curious people had gathered in front of the house where the collapse had occurred on the third and very last floor of a rather old building. It buzzed like hundreds of alarmed bumblebees, filled with rumors, fed with anxious reports from the rescuers, to buzz again in full force. You heard there was a girl crushed by something heavy on the ground floor. She's screaming in pain, and our brave rescuers can't get to her yet. Upon hearing this information, skinny and petite, Christie commanded, "Vanessa, prepare a syringe of anesthetic. I'll try to get through to the injured little girl." At those words, Miles and Vanessa turned around without conspiring. You can't do that until the rescue team gives the go-ahead. The house could collapse at any moment. It's not the time to be afraid, the brave woman replied. There is a child there alone, scared, suffering pain. Why do we even have an ambulance if the rescuers are as slow as turtles? With a syringe of medicine in her outstretched hand, Christie rushed towards the building, near the wall of which the firemen in shiny helmets and the guys from the rescue service were working at the same time. "Woman, where are you going?" Christy was called. "I'm going to try to crawl over to the girl and give her an anesthetic injection. I'm an EMT. It's too narrow in there. None of our guys could get in," she was warned. "I'm going to try anyway." Building rubble, chunks of plaster falling off, blue paint streaks from the wall in the entryway, more rubble and endless dust. Christy was forced to kneel at first, then moved almost crawling. In her mind, she thanked her husband for making her keep fit all these years, going to the swimming pool twice a week, jogging with him in the mornings. At the end of the climb, she finally saw a little girl who had been crushed by a metal door from one of the flats. The little girl's legs were pressed against the heavy rectangular plate like a press, and for some reason they were sticking out towards the exit. It was as if the child had been running and trouble had caught her as she ran. She turned back and called out in a ringing voice, "Here, I'm quite through. 2 skinny men and a girl were crushed by the door, but I'm already giving her an anesthetic injection." "Don't shout. For God's sake," came a whisper in reply. "Loud noises in such a dilapidated building are dangerous now." After a couple of minutes, the baby quieted down. Christy began to shoulder the metal barrier into the flat. With difficulty, but the thing moved. There were rustles from behind, and the woman whispered. "The girl is relaxed by the injection. Drag her by her legs. I'll keep pushing the door in the opposite direction." Together the work went more vigorously. The men pulled the girl to the exit through the narrow labyrinth. The way back no longer seemed so uncharted. Christy hesitated for only a few minutes. Outside, people still didn't realize what had happened next. The building started to collapse like a house of cards before their eyes. Only 2 young boys managed to jump out of the building with a little girl in their arms. Christy, a well-known pediatric emergency room doctor in the city, was buried under the rubble forever. Calm. Always quick to focus in difficult situations. Vanessa, the nurse, screamed, rushed to Miles, who had already grabbed her in an armful and started stroking her head like a little girl. It seemed to both of them that they were now being swallowed up before their eyes by some ravenous monster, a toothy maw of rock-strewn debris. It lured Christy, who had bravely stepped into the tunnel with the syringe, inside and swallowed her without choking. People were bustling around. Someone said that the fate of 4 more tenants, orphaned in an instant, was unknown. Christy's crew stood in the midst of the chaos, hugging each other tightly. A little later, with the pretense that their presence here is no longer needed, went to the car, without unhooking the embrace. They had to go to Winston's now to tell him and little Cassandra the bitter news. A fortnight passed. Miles and Vanessa now had a new doctor in charge, an elderly pediatrician who had transferred to the ER from the city's children's clinic. The silent and even a little stern man was a qualified and experienced specialist. But the nurse and the driver felt their close-knit brigade went sole. Everything seemed to be as usual, and everything was wrong. There was no desire to go to work. The day Christy passed away in front of their eyes, they rushed straight to her house. Cassandra was in kindergarten. Winston was packing his bag to leave for another training session. Vanessa had never before seen the emotion on the face of someone who had learned sad news show in such a way. After their account of the last few minutes, it was as if a blackness had run across Winston's face. Just now his eyes were alive and shining. And then the light in them went out and his skin took on a gray hue. How can I find words to comfort a man in such a situation? Everything said would seem empty and unnecessary. Vanessa and Miles realized that now they were superfluous in the midst of this scorched desert. They did not want to scatter. Some thick, strong thread now bound this couple, who had just witnessed a terrible, hopeless tragedy. They arrived at Vanessa's flat together after their shift. It seemed to them both now that no words were needed to explain to each other how much time they had lost. Vanessa cooked a meal as if she'd done it for her and Miles 1,000 times before. Both of them had such a voracious appetite after the stress they'd been under, that a huge pan of fried potatoes, generously drenched in eggs, had been devoured in about 5 minutes. Before, Miles had always thought that if Vanessa were near him, he would pounce on her like a hungry wolf. That's not what happened. He had such tenderness for this woman that a little more and he would melt like ice cream in hot weather. Miles felt such happiness inside that it seemed as if all the long agony of waiting hadn't happened. When Vanessa fell into a restless sleep, he was still unable to fall into a restful slumber. He wondered if he had imagined that she, his woman, his dream, his vision, was really sleeping on his shoulder. He was very impressed by the warmth with which Vanessa touched even his ugly scar on his face, how she kissed the curved line, looked into his eyes, whether he liked her kind touch, and acted as if she were a hero, a protector, a support. He immediately remembered the disgust on his wife's face when he returned from the hospital after being wounded. They had not uttered a single word of "I love you," "I need you," or "I need you." Everything in their story had been said long ago. Now they were just proving to each other that everything wasn't a mistake, that it was worth it to be patient and wait for things to happen the way they had now. In the morning, Vanessa said nonchalantly, "Miles, you'd better stop by the house and pick up your things. At first, my flat is closer to work and more spacious. Then we'll figure out what to do with your place. I'd join forces with you and exchange our property for something bigger." Miles hadn't known what a quiet family home was before. He and his wife had lived in perpetual separation. He had felt a kind of adamancy all the time then, a kind of coldness within the home walls. It was like he was together with that woman of his. A persistent feeling that they live apart he never let go. That's why he was always on duty. With his Vanessa, it was different from the start. Some kind of reassurance that he was needed and important. That even when he goes to the supermarket to get groceries on behalf of his girlfriend, they have time to miss him. And they greet him so warmly on the doorstep, as if he were returning from some distant journey. Winston, after the tragic death of Christy, lived as if in a delirium. In the morning, he automatically prepared sandwiches and coffee for himself, while stirring on the cooker porridge on milk for Cassandra. The girl became his salvation, his outlet, his light in the window. In his spare time, he couldn't stay in their tiny flat at all. He, Christy, and his parents, after the grief that had fallen on the family, immediately gave up sharply. Almost simultaneously, they became helpless old men. The two eldest of the family began to seek solace in working the land, fanatically planted everything in a row in the garden, finding in this work, if not joy, then oblivion. They tried not to think, not to remember. Even their granddaughter was stubbornly not taken to them on weekends, and they couldn't cope with Cassandra, who asked 100 questions in a minute. Winston took his daughter on impromptu camping trips at weekends. They would go to a river somewhere far away, pitch a tent, wander around the steppe, pick wildflowers for Christy's grave. On the way back, they'd always stop at the cemetery. Winston sat down on a wooden bench and talked for a long time with his beloved woman, who had passed away prematurely. Unhurriedly, he would tell how his and Cassandra's week had gone. Sometimes he proudly boasted that his charges had again won another prize at a prestigious competition. Christy looked up at him from the photograph with her gray-green eyes and smiled that smile of hers with which she liked to announce her life motto. "We are responsible for everything. If something happens on the road, be good enough to go to the victorious end." After visiting the cemetery, Winston felt better for a while. And he also noticed a new peculiarity. He was annoyed by carefree women on the street. A cheerful girl would come along, and he would look after her and think angrily, "I wonder, my dear, and you would step like this, without fear under the ruins of a building held by a thread, if a stranger's child was crying there." A dark annoyance enveloped him. Why did they all go on living and his youth is gone from him forever? Cassandra had grown up all at once. In her very young years, she had turned into a sort of wise old woman. She'd never been cranky since kindergarten. Buckwheat porridge with sausages is the best meal for dinner, and the 101st time she read a bedtime story about Cinderella. Every time was like a new discovery. She wasn't afraid to stay home alone if Winston had to go somewhere urgent. After such absences, she'd always ask him thoughtfully, "Tired? Shall I put the kettle on? Let me take your dirty socks to the bath." She'd already lost her second mum, but she never asked Winston any questions along the lines of, "When's Mum coming back?" or "Why are we living together?" They were having a good time. Even in this orphan solitude, they always understood each other with half a word, half a look. Sometimes in the evenings, Miles and Vanessa came round with cakes or cake. Then they would have noisy tea parties together. They remembered Christy with a light sadness. All four at the table loved her. All four of them missed her very much. Winston sometimes painfully wanted to go somewhere far away from this city, where everything reminded of the happy past. But where to get a new, well-trained team of athletes? And his wife's grave is here. The old people are near. I had no desire to fight reality, no matter what. The anniversary of Christie's death was celebrated in a cafe. The brave doctor's former colleagues took care of everything themselves. Winston, Cassandra, parents were brought to the institution, where everything was already ready. Miles and Vanessa recently signed a marriage, deciding not to delay any longer with the officialization of their relationship. Their family was expecting a new addition in a couple of months. They had recently moved into a new flat, having bought it, as they were going to do, with the money from the sale of their bachelor flats. Many warm words were said to Christie at the table. No one wanted to part quickly. This time even Winston's parents expressed a fervent desire to take the girl to themselves for a couple of days. They sincerely missed the little girl. Having seen off the last guests who had gathered in honor of his wife's memory, Winston wandered home through the very park where they had once met. The same bench in the shade of an old chestnut tree. The same alleys of shrubs and flowers, hiding couples in love from prying eyes. In the far corner of the footpath, some company was frolicking all around. There were 3 young men. All together they surrounded some girl, not allowing her to take a single step. Winston's eyes darkened for a moment. The victim of the youths was an exact replica of his wife in their early youth. Slim, with a lock of loose hair, the girl stood helplessly between the boys, clutching a dainty handbag. The boys moved predatorily toward Megan, tightening the ring around her more and more. Winston added a step. "Guys, don't you think the lady doesn't want to mingle with you?" One of the young predators turned his head slightly, hissed. "Man, you'd better keep walking past. We'll handle our friend here on our own without interference." A cold chill of rage ran through Winston's body, quickly turning into an angry volcanic scorcher. It was infinitely important to him right now to save this young girl, to stop the insolent subjects from mocking her. Even if the whole company was long and well acquainted, even if there was truly nothing threatening her, it was important to him to get her away from those insolent guys and get her away from here. "I don't think the brisk man understands us," one of the guys said. "Go the other way out of here, passerby. We're all our own people here, and you're an extra." Winston glanced at the girl, whose green eyes were filled with despair. She was silent, but her eyes were pleading for help. Winston could not be mistaken that she was uncomfortable with the unpleasant scene that had been played out here. "The girl will leave with me," Winston gave the boys an ultimatum. "Or are you going to regret that our paths have crossed?" "Look at that funny man," grinned one of the trio, stepping away from his friends and standing opposite Winston. "He doesn't understand orders the first time. He's got a bit of a hound." The boy quickly slipped his hand into his pocket and pulled out a small knife. "How's that for an argument, noble knight, who decided to save the honor of a lady he didn't know? Would you rather I tickle your throat with this toy? Or let's see if our lovely Megan likes that kind of game." Winston often dropped by to visit the instructors who rented one of the gyms at the martial arts school. He wasn't afraid of any attacks from the youngsters. Now it was important to him that they did not touch the girl, so similar to his wife at the time of their first dates. The boys rushed towards their victim, who instead of fleeing the scene, froze in place like a statue. They began to come in from all sides, but Winston was only aroused by this. He only had a couple of shots of vodka that night. The rest was done by hatred for the scum who thought that they were the masters of this park, that they were untouchable, and everything was allowed to them. And how much older he was than them, about 10 years, no more. They could almost be considered as one generation, but in the eyes of his opponents there was so much cruelty, felt such a craving for lawlessness and permissiveness, that it did not fit into the framework of decency and the understanding of the coach. The fight began sharply and fiercely. The guy with the knife scratched Winston's shoulder with the sharp blade almost immediately, as if teasing and inviting him to do more. The toughest of the 3 assailants grinned into Winston's eyes, trying to break him mentally at the start. The girl stood so still, mouth open, either from fear or confusion. "Get out of here," Winston shouted to her. "I don't want you here in a second." But she would not give up and shook her head vigorously. I'm not leaving you alone with them. They've been after me for a long time. And here was a chance to be caught alone without friends, and even at a late hour. We all study together at the university, boys from the elite, from the golden youth. And I am an orphanage. It's like a red rag for a bull, for them. Everyone wonders what kind of life I had in childhood and youth in a state institution. It was not customary for us to leave our own behind. I'll be there for you. Winston was so distracted by the girl's monologue that he missed a couple of solid punches to the ribs. Something crunched inside a fracture, he thought grudgingly. Meanwhile, the guy with the knife decided to have a different kind of fun. He jumped up behind the fellow student and pressed the blade against her lower cheek. So you say, my kitty, you're not used to leaving your own behind. He grinned. And if I scratch your throat on your cheeks now, will you abandon the whole park? The girl, to everyone's surprise, who had been in a daze before, did not faint. She turned to the guy. A thin trickle of blood ran down her cheek. I'm so sick of you at uni, you bastards and scum, she shouted. You're nothing without your mums. You're nothing without a stick. That's what you can do for yourself in this life. If they take away your expensive car, your bling, your bank card, what will you know when you have to survive in a wild pack of teenagers? None of the men involved in the fight expected such a fight from the pretty student. The boys were completely furious, even their faces darkened with uncontrollable rage. Having removed the knife from the girl's throat, her opponent joined his friends. Now they surrounded Winston on all sides, like a mass of bodies and faces distorted by anger. He himself could not remember how he had pushed their supposed leader in the chest with all his might. He did a sort of gymnastic somersault, lifting his feet off the ground, and fell down on his back. The back of his head struck the sturdy curb of the alley. A ruby stain of thick blood instantly began to spread beneath the young man's head. Winston, who had so many times taken his boys from the section to the infirmary after injuries, instantly realized that it was bad. Habitually, he put his finger on his opponent's neck in the place where a vein usually beat. There was no pulse. The rest was like a blur. The girl regained consciousness. First, call an ambulance and the police now. Nobody leave, she commanded. The boys frantically began to grab their phones, making calls to parents, services, and important acquaintances. Winston sat down on the curb next to a guy and thought frantically. Cassandra is now at home with her parents, who wanted to keep an eye on her today. I'll be detained, most likely. What will happen to the girl? He quickly beckoned the young student over to him. What's your name? I'm going to need your help. I'm Maggie. Tell me what needs to be done. I'm Winston. Here's a note with my address, my flat keys, my friends Miles and Vanessa's phone number. My 5-year-old daughter Cassandra is at her parents' house right now. Take her and give her to my friends. They'll take care of her. When the police, ambulance, and a bunch of other people arrived, Winston was somehow completely calm. As the saying goes, you can't be safe from jail or want, he thought. I guess it's my turn to learn what it's like to eat government bread and live behind bars. So many important gentlemen had arrived, commanding the men in the prison and the guards who had come with them. Winston was probably lucky that he was taken to the police car at once. Otherwise, the loose dogs surrounding the dead guy's powerful father would have killed Winston on the spot. Maggie, who had been rescued by him from the borderless scum, was always hanging around him. She even managed to show the ambulance the cut on her neck to get a certificate of beatings, all the time she was telling something to the operatives and the investigator. They were brought to the police together. Winston's documents and mobile phone were immediately taken away. While they were dealing with him, Maggie ran like a mouse to the side and made a few phone calls. Then, meeting Winston's eyes, she gave him a thumbs up, saying that the mechanism for taking care of his daughter had been set in motion. She turned out to be a desperate person who manages to keep up with everything. At the trial, she presented everything in such colors that the rich, successful relatives of the participants of the fight were even astonished by such frankness. She found witnesses that the trio of golden boys had been harassing and humiliating her for a long time. Everyone in their group respected her, while these fellow students disliked her. It's not a pretty picture for the victim. Of course, Winston never wanted to hurt a guy who was just starting to live. It was too cruel, even for a young man with a temper. It just worked out the way it did. He was given 5 years in a penal colony for excessive self-defense. Thanks to Maggie's efforts, the judge made the best decision for him. The prosecution insisted on 8 years in prison, but she kept trying to shift the case to a less serious article. Winston did not know exactly how Miles and Vanessa managed to agree with the guardianship authorities, but his daughter Cassandra was given to them for upbringing during his stay in the colony. During the investigation, their family gave birth to Thomas the rosy-cheeked Thomas. The ambulance crew in the city turned out to have connections because they often saved the children of not only ordinary people, but also important officials. When Vanessa was allowed a date, she was able to reassure Winston. "Don't worry, mate, we'll be fine. You and Christy are not strangers to us. I'll write to you about her life regularly and with pleasure. Miles and I will come to your place for a date as soon as we're allowed. I thought you were doing time in a neighboring state. Well, it's not that far for us. And tell me, what are we going to do about your rescued Maggie?" Maggie visits the daycare center all the time, bringing her toys and sweets. She asks for our permission to take the girl out of kindergarten, walk with her in the park, go to the cinema for the premiere of a cartoon. Here did not think that the girl will turn out to be such a loyal friend. We met with her, of course, not under the best, one could even say, tragic circumstances. She so actively defended you during the investigation, so fiercely acted in court as the main witness. You never know how someone like that will behave in extreme circumstances. She was a good one. Jesus, Winston, you're so naive when it comes to the opposite sex. She fell in love with you at first sight. Chivalrous demeanor, protective, good looks, but you're wrong about your age. She went to university after law school. She's 23 now. You're only 9 years apart. She's the one who looks so young because of her petite stature and general fragility. She's got character. Look at the girl. You can't take Christy back. You're going to have a lot of good things ahead of you. You both deserve it. The guard who led the prisoner after his date with the young woman didn't understand why the stout man was smiling all the way to his cell. He could not have guessed that Winston was thinking that there might be happiness in his life if this vivacious person with green eyes waited for him after his imprisonment. Love comes in many forms. Someone constantly trades feelings for trifles, and someone remains the chosen one for many years without fear and reproach. It's a matter of luck.